The bus ride from the city had been long and bumpy, leaving Sarah Walsh alone with nothing but her thoughts and the constant rattle of the engine. She sat clutching her bag against her side, dark eyes fixed on the endless stretch of farmland passing by the window. Each weathered barn and sagging fence seemed to whisper the same message. This is your last chance. Sarah tried to believe that voice, tried to convince herself that spending her last savings on a piece of forgotten land wasn't madness. A sharp pain shot through her temple, forcing her to close her eyes. These headaches had become more frequent lately, blinding episodes that left her gasping for breath. The doctor had called them stress-induced migraines, but they felt different, almost like someone trying to reach into her mind. Sarah fumbled for her pill bottle, swallowing 2 tablets dry. As the pain receded, she returned her gaze to the passing landscape. Strange how familiar it seemed, though she'd never been to this part of rural Pennsylvania before. The rolling hills, the ancient oaks, the winding creek. She could have sworn she'd seen them before, in dreams perhaps. The eviction notice in her purse felt like a lead weight. 6 years as a widow, fighting to keep her head above water after Thomas's accident, had left her with nothing but medical debt and grief that never quite lifted. She'd worked herself to exhaustion, nursing home by day, cleaning offices at night, waiting tables on weekends. But when the rent doubled last month, reality came crashing down. Then she'd seen the county tax auction listing, 20 acres of farmland with a house and outbuildings. Starting bid, $2,000. Her entire savings, scraped together from years of saying no to everything, of skipping meals and any small comfort. $2,000 to erase rent forever. Everyone told her she was crazy. Her sister shouted it was a scam. Her friend Marcus laughed, saying land that cheap must be poisoned or cursed. But Sarah wasn't afraid of hard work. She'd painted apartments, patched roofs, laid linoleum with her own hands. Whatever shape the farmhouse was in, she could fix it. The bus slowed as it approached a weathered sign. Welcome to Millerville, Pop, 2487. Her stomach tightened. This was it. She told herself again this wasn't madness, imagining her husband Eric's voice. Take the chance, Sarah. Better to fail trying than to drown where you stand. The courthouse dominated the small town square, an imposing limestone structure with columns that seemed too grand for the sleepy streets surrounding it. Inside, the auction room smelled of old wood and dust. Rows of chairs filled quickly with men in suits, women with clipboards, contractors in work boots. Sarah felt painfully out of place in her faded dress, the only bidder who had arrived on foot. She sat stiffly, clutching her paddle number as the auctioneer rattled through property after property. As she waited, she noticed 2 men in dark suits at the back of the room. Unlike other bidders, they weren't speaking to anyone, just watching. One caught her looking and held her gaze a beat too long before turning to whisper to his companion. Next lot, the auctioneer called. 20-acre farmstead, Meadow Creek Road, abandoned structures, minimum bid $2,000. A strange hush fell over the room. Sarah raised her paddle before anyone else moved, her hand trembling slightly. I have 2,000, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear 2,100? 2,100 anyone? The silence grew heavier. The clerk frowned and checked her papers. The men in dark suits straightened, their attention suddenly sharp. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer hesitated, then his gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold to bidder 27 for $2,000. The sound echoed in Sarah's chest like a gunshot. Just like that, she was a landowner. She signed the paperwork with a hand that refused to steady. When the clerk slid the deed across the counter, she included a curious look. That place has been sitting empty a long time, the woman said quietly. Most folks say it's more trouble than it's worth. As Sarah gathered her things, a folded yellowed paper slipped from between the property documents. The handwriting was faded but legible. To whoever finds themselves owner of this land, beware the sounds that come from below. They are not settling pipes or shifting earth. Some things should remain buried. Outside, the afternoon sun felt harsh. Sarah stood on the steps, blinking as her eyes adjusted. Across the street, the 2 men in suits were leaning against a black sedan, watching her. One spoke into a cell phone, his eyes never leaving her face. The taxi driver who took her to the property seemed reluctant to turn onto Meadow Creek Road. "Not much out this way," he commented. "You visiting family?" "No," Sarah answered. "I just bought the old farm at the end of the road." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "The Holloway place? Didn't know that was up for sale." "Tax auction," she explained, watching his reaction. He nodded slowly. "Makes sense. Place has been empty going on 50 years now." As they rounded a bend, the farm came into view. Sarah's breath caught. The two-story farmhouse stood on a slight rise, its white paint peeling, its porch sagging. Behind it stretched fields overgrown with weeds, and beyond that, the dark line of woods. A weathered barn leaned precariously to one side. It was exactly as she'd seen it in her dreams. The realization struck her with such force that for a moment she couldn't speak. How was that possible? She'd never been here before. "You all right, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Yes," she managed, "just taking it all in." He pulled up to the beginning of the gravel drive. "This is as far as I'll go. Road's not good for my suspension." Sarah paid him and climbed out. As the taxi drove away, she stood for a long moment, feeling the weight of silence settle around her. No traffic sounds, no neighbors, just the rustle of wind through tall grass and the distant call of a crow. For the first time in years, she could fill her lungs without smelling exhaust or garbage. The air was clean, tinged with wild honeysuckle and sun-warmed earth. Despite the daunting task ahead, something inside her relaxed. The front door was secured with a rusty padlock, which yielded to the key the clerk had given her. It swung open with a mournful groan, revealing a dim interior thick with dust and cobwebs. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, illuminating a living room with peeling wallpaper and a sagging floor. An ancient stone fireplace dominated one wall. It was worse than she'd imagined, but something about it stirred a strange feeling of belonging. This broken house somehow felt more like home than her sterile apartment ever had. She spent the remaining daylight hours clearing a space in the living room, sweeping away decades of dust and debris. The structure itself seemed sound. The roof didn't leak, at least not in the front rooms, and the floors held firm. The electricity had been cut off long ago, but the hand pump at the kitchen sink yielded clear, cold water after some effort. As darkness fell, she set up her camping lantern and unrolled her sleeping bag on the relatively clean floor. Sleep came fitfully, and with it, dreams, strange, vivid images of people she'd never met moving through rooms she recognized as this very house. A woman with auburn hair bent over papers at a kitchen table. A man in a uniform kissing her goodbye at the door. Children running up and down the stairs, their laughter echoing. And beneath it all, a constant rhythm, like a heartbeat coming from deep underground. Sarah woke with a cap, her head pounding. She became aware of a sound, faint but distinct. A dull thud, as though something heavy had shifted far beneath the floor. She clutched her sleeping bag tightly and forced herself to breathe. Old houses made strange sounds. That was all. Yet the words from the note flashed in her mind. "Beware the sounds that come from below." When dawn broke, Sarah rose on stiff limbs. She couldn't live paralyzed by noises and shadows. She had to establish normalcy, create a plan for making this place habitable. She heated water on her camping stove for instant coffee, then took her mug outside to survey her property in the morning light. The land stretched before her, wild but beautiful. The fields would need clearing if she ever wanted to plant anything, but the soil looked rich. As she walked the perimeter of the cleared area, she noticed a path leading toward the woods. Curious, she followed it through tall grass and brambles. The path led to a small family cemetery enclosed by a rusted iron fence. Half a dozen weathered headstones stood in neat rows. Sarah brushed away moss from the largest one, revealing a name. Eleanor Walsh, 1929 to 1972. Beloved wife and mother. Her light will never fade. Walsh, the same last name as her own. A coincidence, surely. Walsh wasn't uncommon. Yet it sent a shiver through her. She moved to the next stone. William Walsh, 1925 to 1973. He sought truth at any cost. A twig snapped behind her. Sarah turned to find an elderly man standing at the edge of the cemetery. He wore faded overalls and a flannel shirt, his weathered face partially hidden beneath a battered cap. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, his voice gravelly. "Saw someone moving around the old place." Thought I'd check. Sarah relaxed slightly. I'm Sarah Walsh. I just bought the property. Something flickered in the old man's eyes, surprise, perhaps. Walsh, you say? Interesting. He extended a calloused hand. James Carter owned the farm down the road. You related to the Walshes that owned this place? He asked, nodding toward the headstones. Not that I know of, Sarah admitted. My father was from Ohio, never mentioned family here. James studied her face. You look like her. Eleanor, something about the eyes. Did you know them? Sarah asked. He nodded slowly. Knew them well enough. Eleanor was a scientist, worked for the government. William was ex-military. They had a daughter, must have been about 5 when they... He trailed off. When they what? Sarah prompted. James shook his head. Bad business. Eleanor died first. Some said it was an accident. William passed the next year. The daughter got sent to relatives somewhere out west. Sarah wanted to press for details, but something in his expression warned her not to push. I've got my work cut out for me, she said instead, gesturing toward the overgrown fields. That you do? I've got tools you can borrow if you need. He added, his tone suddenly serious. One piece of advice, stay away from the east field, the one locals call the Harlo. Ground's not stable there. Back at the house, Sarah decided to explore the upper floor. The master bedroom faced east, overlooking the fields and woods beyond. As she moved through the room, a floorboard creaked and shifted beneath her foot. Curious, she pried it up, revealing a small space containing a metal box. Inside, she found photographs, yellowed with age, and a leather-bound journal. The photos showed a family, a man and woman standing in front of the farmhouse. The woman held a small girl with dark hair in her arms. The child's eyes were the same unusual gray-green that Sarah saw in the mirror every day. She turned the photo over. Written on the back, Eleanor, William, and Rebecca, 1969, Rebecca, her mother's name. Sarah sank onto the dusty floor, her mind reeling. Her mother had died when Sarah was just 10, and she'd never spoken of her early childhood. Sarah's father had always been vague about her mother's family, saying only that they had complicated histories. With shaking hands, she opened the journal. The handwriting was precise, dated entries spanning from 1966 to 1972. Eleanor Walsh had been a scientist recruited for a classified project called ECHO. The early entries mentioned research into heightened human awareness and untapped cerebral potential. But as the years progressed, the tone changed. Entries became cryptic, filled with concerns about ethical boundaries and unsanctioned testing. The final entry, dated 2 weeks before Eleanor's death, sent chills down Sarah's spine. They've gone too far. What we've awakened beneath the Harlo can't be contained. William says we have to get Rebecca away before it's too late. If anything happens to us, this record must survive. Someone needs to know the truth about Echo, about what's still down there, waiting. The headache returned with sudden ferocity, dropping Sarah to her knees. Images flashed behind her eyes, a concrete corridor, a metal door, a room filled with strange equipment. She could smell antiseptic and taste metal. She heard voices, muffled but urgent, and felt a deep vibration, as though something massive was shifting far below. That night, the sounds from below came again, louder, more insistent, a rhythmic thudding that vibrated through the floorboards. In her half-sleep, Sarah found herself reaching for a pen. By dim lantern light, her hand moved across a blank page, sketching without conscious direction. When she woke at dawn, she stared in disbelief at what she'd drawn, a detailed map of tunnels and rooms, spreading beneath the earth like roots. At the center was a circular chamber labeled simply Echo. The rain started just after sunrise, a steady downpour that turned the driveway to mud. Sarah spent the morning securing tarps over leaks. By noon, she was soaked and chilled, but satisfied that the house would weather the storm. James's truck pulled into the yard. He carried a box of supplies, canned goods, bread, a thermos of soup, and basic tools. Thought you might need these, he said. Storm's supposed to last a couple days. Thank you, Sarah said, touched by his kindness. I wasn't prepared for this. James glanced around the kitchen. Nobody's prepared for this place. Then with studied casualness, you find anything interesting in the house? Sarah hesitated. Some old photographs in a journal belonging to Eleanor Walsh. His posture stiffened slightly. Figured there might be something like that. Eleanor was the type to keep records. The journal mentioned Echo and something about the Hollow. You warned me about that area. James was silent for a long moment, considering her. Finally, he sighed. Might as well show you. You'll find out sooner or later, especially with this rain. He led her to the window facing east, pointing to a distant part of the property where the land dipped slightly. That's the Hollow. The ground there isn't natural. It's settled over something man-made, something big. What is it? Sarah asked, though she already knew. Bunker, James said simply. Government built it in the early 50s, during the Cold War. Goes deep. Nobody knows exactly how deep. It was a research facility, all hush-hush. Eleanor and William were part of it. What were they researching? Sarah pressed. James shook his head. Nobody knows for sure. Rumors? Plenty of those. Some said weapons, others said mind control. All I know is people went in and didn't come out, and things happened that couldn't be explained. What kind of things? Lights in the sky some nights, strange sounds, animals acting peculiar. And folks around here started getting headaches, bad ones, dreams that didn't feel like dreams. He gave her a pointed look. Sound familiar? Sarah's mouth went dry. How did you know? You've got the look, same as Eleanor had near the end, like you're hearing something nobody else can hear. He tapped his temple. Gets worse the longer you stay, especially if you're related. If I'm what? Related, he finished. Blood calls to blood, my grandmother used to say. Whatever's down there, it knows you're here, and it's waking up. You're saying something is alive down there? After 50 years? James turned to face her. I'm saying something is down there that doesn't play by the rules we understand. Time doesn't mean the same thing to it. Why are you telling me this? Why help me? Because I was there, he said quietly. I was a guard at the facility. Just a kid, really. 20 years old, following orders. By the time I realized Eleanor was dead, William was half mad with grief, and the whole operation was being shut down. He looked down at his hands. I helped William get Rebecca out before they closed everything up. Promised him I'd keep an eye on the place. For 50 years, that's what I've done. Until I showed up, Sarah said softly. James nodded. Until you showed up, with her eyes and his jaw. He studied her face. You don't remember any of it, do you? You were so young. Are you saying I was here? That Rebecca was my mother? Rebecca Walsh became Rebecca Miller when William sent her to live with his cousin in Ohio, James confirmed. She was only 5 when they smuggled her out. They changed her name, created a new identity, erased all connections to this place and what happened here, for her protection. James explained how Project Echo was designed to expand human consciousness, accessing abilities like telepathy and remote viewing. They started with adults, then discovered children's minds were more adaptable. If a parent showed potential, the child often showed more. Eleanor was their star, he said. When they found out she was pregnant, they monitored her through the whole pregnancy, started testing Rebecca almost from birth. The journal said they awakened something beneath the Hollow. What did that mean? They built the facility over natural caves that went deep into the earth. Something about the rock formation amplified the psychic energy they were working with. They started detecting responses, patterns that couldn't be attributed to any of the test subjects. From what? They never knew for sure. Some thought it was a collective unconscious. Others suggested entities or forces that existed on different planes. He shook his head. Whatever it was, it got stronger, started affecting everyone in the facility. What happened to Eleanor? Official reports said equipment malfunction, electrical fire. But William never believed it. He thought they sacrificed her, pushed her abilities too far. He looked directly at Sarah. Your mother was there when it happened, saw things no child should see. These abilities, could they be inherited? Could I have them too? That's what I've been afraid of, James admitted. When I heard your name, I knew it wasn't coincidence. You found your way back because something called you. And now that you're here, it's going to get stronger. As if on cue, pain lanced through Sarah's temple. She gasped, pressing her palms against her eyes. This time the images were clearer. A circular room deep underground, walls lined with strange equipment. People in white coats observing a child, her mother, as she stared at a series of cards. And beneath it all, a presence, vast and patient, reaching upward through rock and soil, searching. "It's happening already," James said. Not a question, but a statement. Sarah nodded. "What do I do now?" "You have two choices. Leave this place. Get as far away as you can and hope whatever connection you have fades with distance. Or you face it. Find out what's down there. Finish what your grandmother started." "Which would you choose?" Sarah asked. "Doesn't matter what I choose. I'm not a Walsh. I don't have the blood or the ability." He stood to leave. "One more thing. Those men at the auction, the ones in suits, they'll be back. They've been monitoring this place for decades. Now that a Walsh has returned, they'll be watching even closer." That night, the sounds came again, louder than before, a rhythmic thudding that vibrated through the house. But this time, it didn't frighten Sarah. Instead, she found herself listening intently, as though trying to decipher a message in the pattern. Just before dawn, the rain stopped. Sarah woke to an eerie stillness and pale light filtering through the windows. She felt strangely energized, decisive. She walked toward the east, toward the hollow. From a distance, it looked unremarkable. Just a slight depression where water had pooled from the rain. But as she drew closer, she noticed something odd. While the rest of the field was waterlogged, a perfect circle in the center remained dry, as though the water couldn't touch it. Sarah approached cautiously. At the edge of the dry circle, she stopped. The ground felt different underfoot, firmer, almost vibrating with energy. She knelt and pressed her palm against the earth. Something surged up through her arm, not pain, but a jolt of awareness so intense it took her breath away. Images flooded her mind, corridors stretching deep underground, rooms filled with equipment, people moving with purpose. And at the center, that circular chamber from her drawing, pulsing with a light that seemed alive. As she stared at the ground, something caught her eye, a flash of color against the brown earth. She brushed away dirt to reveal a scrap of fabric, stained dark but recognizable as blue. Embroidered in one corner were initials, E.W. Eleanor Walsh. Sarah turned the fabric over. On the back, barely visible against the stains, was a name written in what looked like dried blood. Rebecca Walsh. Her mother's name, written in her grandmother's blood. A sound behind her made her whirl around. At the edge of the field stood Sheriff Mitchell, approaching with measured steps. "Ms. Walsh," he called, "thought I'd welcome you to Millerville." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Found something interesting there?" Sarah quickly tucked the fabric into her pocket. "Just checking drainage after the storm." He stopped a few feet away, gaze flicking to the dry circle behind her. "Interesting spot. Local folks tend to avoid this area. Say it's bad luck." "So I've heard. Just getting to know my property." "Your property," Mitchell repeated with emphasis. "Yes, I suppose it is now. Though some might say land like this can never truly belong to anyone." There was something in his tone, a hint of knowledge beyond casual conversation. Sarah's instincts prickled with warning. "James Carter came by yesterday," she said, watching for his reaction. "He was very helpful." A flash of something, annoyance, crossed Mitchell's face. "Old James is a fixture around here. Been watching this place a long time." He studied her face. "You look familiar. Got family from around here?" "Not that I know of," Sarah lied. Mitchell handed her a business card. "Any problems? Day or night, you call." As he turned to leave, he added casually, "By the way, couple of government fellows were asking about this property yesterday. Something about environmental testing. Said they might be stopping by." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What kind of testing?" Mitchell shrugged. "Standard stuff, soil samples, water quality." His eyes met hers, challenging. "Unless there's something in your soil you're concerned about." "No," Sarah said firmly, "nothing at all." She watched him drive away before releasing the breath she'd been holding. The government men James had warned about were already making moves. Her time to explore, to understand, was limited. The past was reaching for her, and she would have to decide whether to run from it or dive straight into its depths. A knock at the door startled Sarah from her thoughts. James stood on the porch carrying a shovel and pickaxe. His face was grim with determination. "Made a decision?" he asked without preamble. Sarah nodded. I'm going down there today, but I need your help. Relief flickered across the old man's weathered features. Been waiting 50 years to know the truth. He set the tools down with a metallic clank. We don't have much time. Mitchell will have those government boys here by tomorrow, maybe sooner. As Sarah gathered what they'd need, flashlights, rope, water, and the first aid kit she'd brought from the city, she tucked Eleanor's journal and the scrap of bloody fabric into her backpack, along with the map she'd drawn in her sleep. As they prepared to leave, James placed a small revolver on the kitchen table. Just in case, he said quietly. There might be more than secrets down there. Sarah hesitated before picking it up. The weight felt strange in her hand, foreign yet familiar, as though she'd held it before. She tucked it into her jacket pocket. The Harlo looked different in the midday light, less mysterious but somehow more ominous. The perfect circle of dry earth stood out starkly against the rain-soaked field around it. James surveyed the area with a practiced eye. Hatch should be right in the center, he said. Buried about 2 feet down now. Won't be easy to open after all these years. The digging was hard work. The soil was clay-heavy and compacted by decades of rain and snow. Sarah's muscles burned with the effort, but she pressed on, driven by a need she couldn't fully explain. After nearly an hour, her shovel struck something solid with a dull clang. There it is, James said, dropping to his knees to clear away the remaining dirt. They uncovered a circular metal plate about 5 feet in diameter, its surface corroded but intact. Strange symbols were etched around its perimeter, not military markings or letters, but flowing patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. James inserted a crowbar into a barely visible seam and levered upward. The hatch resisted, decades of rust sealing it shut. Sarah added her strength to his, and slowly, with a groan of protesting metal, it began to move. But as the hatch lifted slightly, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The underside of the rim wasn't uniformly rusted. In places, the metal was shiny, the rust scraped away. James, she said quietly, pointing to the marks, someone's opened this recently. The old man frowned, running his fingers along the clean streaks. Damn, he muttered. Mitchell must have another team already working down here. We need to move fast. Together they lifted the heavy hatch, swinging it back until it rested on the wet ground beside the opening. A rush of stale air escaped from below, carrying a scent of concrete and metal, and something else, something sharp and electric, like the air after a lightning strike. Sarah shone her flashlight into the opening, revealing a vertical shaft with a ladder bolted to one side. The metal rungs disappeared into darkness about 20 feet down. She drew a deep breath and moved to descend. I'll go first, James said, taking the light from her. Test the ladder. Sarah watched as he lowered himself carefully into the shaft, the beam illuminating rusted walls as he descended. After a moment, his voice echoed up, Ladder's solid. Come on down. The climb down felt longer than it looked, each rung cold and slick beneath her palms. The air grew colder as she descended, the strange electric smell stronger. When her feet touched solid ground, she found herself in a small antechamber with concrete walls and a heavy metal door. James stood before the door, examining a keypad mounted beside it. Electronic lock, he said. But the power's been off for decades, should be in failsafe mode. He placed both hands on a large wheel in the center of the door. It turned with surprising ease, as though it had been used recently. The door swung outward with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Beyond lay a corridor stretching into darkness, its walls lined with pipes and conduits. Emergency lights, long dead, hung at intervals from the ceiling. Their flashlight beams cut through the gloom, revealing doorways on either side. As they moved forward, Sarah felt a pressure building in her head. Not pain, but awareness, as though something was reaching out to touch at her mind. With each step, the sensation intensified, becoming almost a whisper just below the threshold of hearing. They passed several small rooms, storage areas filled with rusted equipment, a security checkpoint with an abandoned desk, a locker room with uniforms still hanging on hooks. Everything looked as though the occupants had left in a hurry, expecting to return. In one of the lockers, Sarah found a worn leather wallet. Inside was an ID card bearing the name Dr. Daniel Matthews and a faded photo of a young man with serious eyes. Behind the ID was a crumpled photograph of a woman holding a baby. I wonder what happened to them all, Sarah murmured. The regular staff, I mean, not just Eleanor and William. Some were transferred, James replied, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Others disappeared. After the incident, the whole program went dark. Records erased, personnel reassigned or retired with generous pensions and strict confidentiality agreements. And those who wouldn't stay quiet? James's expression darkened. Let's just say the Cold War was a convenient time for accidents. At the end of the corridor, they faced another heavy door, this one marked with faded yellow and black stripes. A sign, barely legible after so many years, read, "Authorized personnel only. Project Echo." Sarah reached for the wheel, but James caught her arm. "Wait," he whispered. "Listen." In the silence, Sarah heard it, a faint metallic scraping coming from somewhere beyond the door. Then voices, too distant to make out words, but unmistakably human. "We're not alone down here," James whispered, drawing the revolver from his jacket. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to focus on the presence she'd felt since entering the bunker. The pressure in her head increased, but now she could distinguish separate threads. The vast, ancient awareness she'd sensed from above, and something more immediate. Human minds, focused and intent. "Two people," she whispered. "In the main hub, I think, searching for something." James raised an eyebrow, but didn't question how she knew. "Mitchell's men, most likely. We need to be careful." They turned the wheel slowly, minimizing the noise. The door opened to reveal a large circular room, a hub with corridors branching off like spokes. In the center stood a control station with monitors and equipment, all dark and silent now. Sarah and James crouched low, staying in the shadows at the edge of the room. From one of the corridors came the beam of a flashlight, sweeping across the dusty floor. Two figures moved into view, men in dark clothing, carrying equipment cases. One held what looked like a scanning device, waving it methodically over the walls and floor. "Getting stronger readings here," the man said, his voice carrying clearly in the silent chamber. "Whatever's down there, it's active." The second man consulted a tablet. "Matches the pattern from 72. Energy signature is nearly identical, just weaker, probably attenuated by the containment measures. If there's a breach in the lower chamber, then we need to move faster. Director wants confirmation before we bring in the full team." Sarah and James exchanged glances. These weren't local sheriff's deputies or ordinary government inspectors. They were specialists, here for the same thing Sarah sought, whatever lay beneath the facility. The men moved toward another corridor, their voices fading. Sarah waited until their lights disappeared before whispering, "We need to follow them." James looked uncertain. "They're armed, Sarah, and they know what they're doing." "So do I," she replied, surprising herself with her conviction. "I know this place, James. I can feel it. And I think it's been waiting for me." The old man studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Your grandmother said something similar, near the end, that whatever was down here had chosen her." He sighed heavily. "Let's go, but stay behind me." They crossed the hub quickly, following the corridor the men had taken. Unlike the entrance tunnel, this passage sloped gradually downward, leading deeper into the earth. The walls here were different, rough-hewn in places, as though the facility had been partially carved from natural rock. The corridor ended at a junction where three passages branched off in different directions. Fresh footprints in the dust showed the men had taken the center path. As Sarah moved to follow, a loud crash echoed from somewhere ahead, followed by shouting. James raised his gun, motioning for Sarah to stay back. They crept forward cautiously until they reached another doorway. Beyond it lay a laboratory, its equipment draped in plastic sheeting that had yellowed with age. The two men stood near the far wall, one clutching his hand, blood seeping between his fingers. "Damn it," he hissed. "The whole shelf came down. We need to—" He stopped abruptly, staring at something Sarah couldn't see. His companion turned slowly, raising what Sarah now recognized as a pistol with a sound suppressor attached. "We have company," the second man said coldly. James reacted instantly, pushing Sarah back into the corridor. "Run," he shouted, firing once into the lab. The sound was deafening in the confined space. Sarah stumbled backward as James fired again, then turned to follow her. Behind them came the nearly silent foot of the suppressed pistol, and chunks of concrete exploded from the wall beside James's head. They ran blindly, taking the left branch at the junction. This corridor was narrower, with fewer doors along its length. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The passage seemed to stretch endlessly before them, curving slightly to the right. "In here," James gasped, pulling open a door and pushing Sarah through. They found themselves in what appeared to be an observation room. One wall was made entirely of thick glass, beyond which lay a small chamber containing a single chair bolted to the floor. Restraints hung from the chair's arms and legs, their leather cracked with age. James secured the door, then leaned against it, breathing heavily. "We lost them for now, but they'll search every room. We need a plan." Sarah approached the glass wall, drawn by an inexplicable pull. As her fingers touched the cold surface, a vision flashed through her mind. A child strapped to the chair, electrodes attached to her small head, crying silently as men in white coats watched from this very spot. "My mother," she whispered. "They tested her here." Before James could respond, a soft blue light began to glow from somewhere beneath the chair in the testing chamber. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. "What the hell?" James moved to stand beside her, staring at the impossible light. "There's no power down here. Hasn't been for decades." But Sarah understood. "It's not electricity," she said quietly. "It's responding to me, to my presence, Obama." The blue glow intensified, spreading across the floor of the testing chamber. Patterns formed in the light, the same flowing symbols that had been etched around the hatch above. Sarah recognized them now, not as symbols, but as a form of language, complex and beautiful. "I can read it," she murmured, astonished. It's trying to communicate." James looked at her with growing concern. "Sarah, there's nothing to read. It's just light." But to Sarah, the patterns were as clear as printed words. They spoke of awareness, of patience, of waiting through vast stretches of time, and most disturbingly of recognition. It knew her, had known her mother and grandmother before her, had been waiting for a Walsh to return. A sound from the corridor snapped her back to the immediate danger. Footsteps approached, then paused outside their door. James raised his gun, aiming steadily at the entrance. The door handle turned slowly. Sarah held her breath, every muscle tensed for flight. But instead of the armed men they expected, the door swung open to reveal a slender figure in the shadows. "Rebecca?" a soft voice called. "Is that you?" Sarah froze, recognition flooding through her, though she couldn't possibly know it this voice. James lowered his gun slightly, confusion evident on his face. "Eleanor?" he whispered incredulously. The figure stepped into the room and Sarah gasped. It was a woman in her early 40s, dressed in a simple gray outfit that resembled hospital scrubs. Her auburn hair was streaked with white, her face lined with age beyond her years. But her eyes, they were Sarah's eyes, the same unusual gray-green. "Not Eleanor," the woman said, her voice rough from disuse. "Rebecca, you're Rebecca James." The old man staggered back as though struck. "Impossible," he breathed. "Rebecca Walsh died in 1994. Sarah's mother." "My mother died when I was 10, Sarah said shakily, "in a car accident in Ohio." The woman's gaze shifted to Sarah, her expression softening. "They told you that. Easier than the truth." She approached slowly as though afraid Sarah might flee. "You're my daughter, my Sarah." The world seemed to tilt around Sarah. This couldn't be real. Yet the resemblance was undeniable. The same cheekbones, the same slight tilt to her eyes. And through the confusion and fear, something deep within Sarah recognized this woman. "How?" she managed to ask. "How is this possible?" Before Rebecca could answer, the blue light from the testing chamber flared brightly, illuminating the room in a pulse of unearthly radiance. Through the glass, Sarah saw the chair begin to vibrate, then rise several inches off the floor, hovering there impossibly. "It's happening again," Rebecca said urgently. "We need to move. Now. They'll have detected the energy spike." "Who are you talking about?" James demanded. "Mitchell's men?" "Mitchell is just a pawn," Rebecca replied, already moving toward the door. "The real power never left. They've been here all along, monitoring, waiting." She fixed Sarah with an intense gaze. "Waiting for you, Sarah. for what you can do. Sarah followed numbly, her mind reeling. James brought up the rear, checking the corridor before they emerged. Rebecca led them swiftly through passages that weren't on Sarah's mental map, moving with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the facility. I don't understand, Sarah said as they hurried along. If you're my mother, where have you been all these years? Why did Dad tell me you were dead? Your father didn't know, Rebecca replied without slowing. After the accident, they took me, made it look like I died. Russell believed it, just like everyone else. Her voice caught. I never wanted to leave you. Never. They reached a heavy steel door unlike the others, newer, its surface unmarked by age or rust. Rebecca placed her palm against a scanner beside it, and to Sarah's amazement, the panel lit up, reading her handprint. The door slid open with a soft hiss. How is any of this still working? James asked, bewildered. They never shut it down, Rebecca answered, ushering them through. Just buried it, classified it so deeply that even most of the government forgot it existed. But a few remembered, a few continued. Beyond the door lay a stark white corridor that contrasted sharply with the aging facility they'd left behind. The lights here worked, illuminating their way with a harsh fluorescent glare. The walls were smooth and featureless, broken only by another door at the far end. This section was built in the 90s, Rebecca explained as they walked. After they brought me back, they wanted to continue the Eleanor's work, but with better containment, better control. Control of what? Sarah asked, though a part of her already knew. Rebecca stopped at the far door, turning to face her daughter fully for the first time. The entity, she said simply. The intelligence that exists in the caves beneath us. The thing that reached out to Eleanor, to me, and now to you. She touched Sarah's face gently, her fingers trembling. The headaches, the dreams, the knowledge you couldn't possibly have. It's been calling you home, Sarah. Just as it called me. Just as it called Eleanor. What is it? Sarah whispered. We don't know, not really. It exists primarily as a form of energy, a consciousness without physical form as we understand it. It's been here longer than humans have walked the earth. And it's curious about us. Rebecca's expression darkened. Some want to use it as a weapon. Others worship it like a ma, but it's neither. It's simply different. Elder. The door behind them burst open and the two men from earlier rushed in, weapons raised. James spun around, firing his revolver. The shot went wide, and one of the men returned fire. The bullet struck James in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the floor. James! Sarah cried, moving to help him, but Rebecca pulled her toward the far door. No time, she shouted, slapping her palm against another scanner. He'll live, but only if we move now. The door slid open, revealing a circular chamber beyond. Rebecca pushed Sarah through just as more shots rang out. The door sealed behind them with a pneumatic thump, cutting off the sounds of pursuit. Sarah whirled on her mother. We can't just leave him. We have no choice, Rebecca said firmly. They won't kill him. They need information. But they will kill us if they catch us. Or worse. Sarah looked around the chamber they'd entered. It was at least 50 feet in diameter, its ceiling lost in shadows above. The walls were lined with complicated equipment, monitors, sensors, devices she couldn't begin to identify. In the center of the room was a raised platform, and on it stood an apparatus that resembled a dentist's chair surrounded by a cage of delicate metal arms. The primary interface, Rebecca said, following her gaze, where they connect human minds to the entity. They connected you, Sarah asked, horror dawning. Rebecca nodded, her eyes haunted. For 20 years. At first, they just wanted me to communicate with it, to learn. But then they realized I could do more. I could channel its energy, direct it. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a forearm crisscrossed with surgical scars. They modified me, made me a better conduit. That's inhuman, Sarah breathed. They don't see it that way. To them, I was a valuable asset, a tool. Rebecca moved to one of the consoles, her fingers flying over the controls with practiced ease. Screens flickered to life, displaying readings and diagrams Sarah couldn't comprehend. How did you escape? She asked as her mother worked. I didn't, not really. I'm still part of the program. But I have certain freedoms now. They need me cooperative, you see, because I'm the only one who can communicate with it without going insane. She glanced up, her expression pained. Or at least I was. until you arrived. Understanding dawned on Sarah. That's why they let me buy the farm. They wanted me here. They want me to replace you. Rebecca nodded grimly. You're younger, stronger, and the bloodline connection seems to strengthen with each generation. Your potential is even greater than mine. What happens now? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear churning inside her. Now we wake it up, Rebecca said, pressing a final sequence of buttons. All the way up, so you can speak to it directly. The floor beneath them shuddered slightly, and a low hum filled the air. The lights dimmed, then brightened again, as power surged through the systems around them. In the center of the room, the metal arms of the interface apparatus began to move, rotating slowly around the empty chair. I don't understand, Sarah said. If these people are looking for us, why are you activating their equipment? Rebecca's smile was thin. Because it's not their equipment, Sarah. It never was. They built this facility over something ancient, something they found but never truly understood. The interface is their attempt to control it, to harness it, but the entity has its own agenda. She moved to stand before Sarah, taking both of your hands. Eleanor discovered the truth too late. The entity doesn't want to be a weapon or a tool. It wants to be free, and it believes we, our family, can help it. A pounding began at the sealed door, followed by shouted commands to open up. Rebecca ignored them, leading Sarah toward the center of the room. I can't do what they want anymore, she said urgently. I'm too weak now, too damaged by years of their experiments. But you're fresh, untapped. You can finish what Eleanor started, what I continued. What are you asking me to do? Sarah demanded, pulling back. Sit in the chair. Make contact. But not for them. For us. For the entity. Rebecca's eyes were fever bright. It saved me, Sarah. Kept me sane through years of their tests. And in return, I promised to help free it. The pounding at the door grew louder, accompanied by the whine of some kind of cutting tool. They were breaking through. There's no time to explain everything, Rebecca said desperately. You have to trust me. Trust what you feel, what you know deep inside. The entity has been preparing you for this moment your entire life. Sarah hesitated, torn between fear and an inexplicable certainty that her mother was right. The headaches, the dreams, the map she'd drawn without conscious thought, all of it had been leading her here. What will happen to you? She asked. To James? If we succeed, we all go free, Rebecca promised. If we fail, she glanced at the door where sparks now flew as the cutting tool bit into the metal. Then nothing matters anyway. Sarah took a deep breath and moved toward the chair. As she sat down, the metal arms adjusted automatically, positioning themselves around her head and torso without touching her. The humming grew louder, and the air around her seemed to thicken, charged with potential. What do I do? She called to Rebecca, who now stood at a control panel several feet away. Open your mind, her mother answered. Let it in. Don't fight what you see or feel. The interface activated with a surge of power that made the lights flicker. Sarah gasped as energy coursed through her, not painful but overwhelming in its intensity. The room around her seemed to fade, replaced by a void filled with swirling patterns of light, the same patterns she'd seen in the observation room, but vastly more complex, more beautiful. And then she felt it, a presence, vast and ancient, touching her consciousness. Unlike the previous sensations of pressure or whispers, this was direct communication, mind to mind. It carried no words, only impressions, emotions, and images that cascaded through her awareness. Sarah saw the entity as it saw itself, a complex network of energy, existing partially in our dimension, but extending into others beyond human perception. She saw its long hibernation beneath the earth, its gradual awakening as human minds first brushed against its consciousness. She saw its curiosity, its desire to understand these strange, brief creatures whose thoughts flared so brightly and faded so quickly. And she saw what the government researchers had tried to do, their attempts to weaponize its energy, to bend its will to human purposes, their failures, their growing desperation, and finally their decision to use Eleanor as a more direct conduit. Sarah witnessed her grandmother's last moments through the entity's perception. Eleanor, strapped to a chair much like the one Sarah now sat in, her mind opened fully to the entity's power. The surge of energy as the entity tried to communicate fully for the first time. The researchers panicked as systems overloaded. The fire that followed, consuming those who had sought to control what they didn't understand. But Eleanor hadn't died, not then. The entity had protected her, shifting her partially out of physical reality as the laboratory burned around her. When she returned, changed by the experience, the surviving researchers had been terrified of what she had become, what she knew. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the story unfolded in her mind. Eleanor's murder, made to look like an accident. William's discovery of the truth and his desperate attempt to save his daughter. Rebecca's life in hiding, then her recapture years later when her abilities began to manifest strongly. And through it all, the entity's patient waiting. For 3 generations it had touched the Walsh bloodline, preparing them, strengthening them for this moment. With shocking clarity, Sarah understood what it wanted. Not destruction or domination, but connection. A bridge between its reality and ours, and freedom from the constraints placed upon it by human fear and greed. The door to the chamber burst open with a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Men in tactical gear poured through, weapons raised. Sarah was only dimly aware of them, her consciousness still linked to the entity. She saw Rebecca move to intercept them, heard shouting and the sound of a struggle. Then a single gunshot echoed through the chamber. "Mom!" Sarah screamed, fighting to break free of the interface. But the connection held her fast, the entity's presence wrapping around her mind with increasing urgency. Through tear-blurred eyes, she saw Rebecca crumple to the floor, blood spreading across her gray shirt. One of the men, taller than the others, his bearing authoritative, stepped over her body and approached the interface platform. "Ms. Walsh," he called, his voice oddly distorted through Sarah's altered perception. "You need to disconnect now. What you're experiencing isn't real. It's a form of hallucination induced by the energy field." But Sarah knew better. The entity showed her the truth. This man's decades of involvement with Project Echo, his obsession with harnessing its power, his willingness to sacrifice anyone who stood in his way, including Eleanor, including Rebecca. Rage surged through Sarah, a white-hot fury unlike anything she'd ever felt. The entity responded to her emotion, its energy intensifying around her. The metal arms of the interface began to vibrate, then glow with an unearthly blue light. "Shut it down," the man shouted to his team. "Cut the power now." But it was too late. The connection between Sarah and the entity had grown too strong to sever. Power surged through the interface, through Sarah, and out into the chamber. Equipment exploded in showers of sparks. The lights flickered wildly, then went out completely, leaving only the blue glow emanating from Sarah and the interface. In the darkness, Sarah felt the entity's intention crystallize. It had waited patiently for generations, gradually influencing the Walsh bloodline, preparing them for this moment. Now, through Sarah, it would finally act. The blue light expanded outward from her body in a pulse of pure energy that swept through the chamber. The armed men were thrown back against the walls, their weapons flying from their hands. The tall man alone remained standing, protected by some aspect of the interface design, but his expression had changed from authority to fear. "What have you done?" he whispered. Sarah rose from the chair, the interface arms still rotating around her, though she was no longer seated. The blue energy continued to flow through and around her, lifting her hair in a ghostly halo. "I've set it free," she said, her voice overlaid with harmonics that made it sound as though multiple people were speaking at once. "And now you'll answer for what you've done to my family." The man backed away, reaching for a sidearm. Sarah made a small gesture, and the gun flew from his holster, skittering across the floor. "Eleanor Walsh," she said, advancing on him. "Rebecca Walsh. Decades of pain and imprisonment, all for your ambition." "You don't understand," he protested. "The potential of the entity, the applications." "I understand perfectly," Sarah interrupted, "better than you ever could." She reached out, not physically touching him, but extending the blue energy until it enveloped his body. The man gasped, his eyes widening as his mind was open to the entity's full awareness, experiencing for the first time what the Walsh women had endured. "Feel what they felt," Sarah whispered. "Know what they knew." He screamed then, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the chamber. When Sarah finally released him, he collapsed to the floor, his eyes vacant, his mind shattered by an understanding too vast for his consciousness to bear. The blue energy receded slightly as Sarah turned away from him, moving to where Rebecca lay motionless on the floor. She knelt beside her mother, gathering her into her arms, heedless of the blood that soaked them both. "Mom," she whispered, the otherworldly harmonics fading from her voice. "Please don't leave me. Not when I've just found you." Through her connection with the entity, Sarah sensed the faint flicker of life still present in Rebecca's body. Without conscious thought, she directed the energy flowing through her into her mother, willing it to heal, to restore. Rebecca's body arched as the blue light enveloped her, the bullet wound in her chest closing as Sarah watched in amazement. When Rebecca's eyes fluttered open, they glowed with the same ethereal blue before fading back to their natural gray-green. "Sarah," she gasped, "you did it. You freed it." "Us," Sarah corrected, helping her mother to sit up. "I freed us all." Around them, the chamber was in chaos. Equipment smoldered, and the men who had broken in lay unconscious against the walls. Only James remained untouched by the energy pulse, protected by his connection to the Walsh family. The old man limped toward them, clutching his wounded shoulder, but smiling through the pain. "Knew you were special," he said to Sarah, "just like your grandmother." A tremor ran through the facility, dust and small chunks of concrete raining down from the ceiling. The entity's freedom was having physical effects on the structure built to contain it. "We need to leave," Rebecca said urgently. "The whole bunker might collapse." They made their way out through the ruined doors, supporting each other through corridors that now shook continuously. The blue energy still surrounded Sarah, lighting their way and protecting them from falling debris. As they reached the main hub, they found it in even worse condition. Cracks spread across the walls and ceiling, widening as they watched. The way back to the entrance shaft was already blocked by a cave-in. "There's another way out," Rebecca said, pointing to one of the corridors they hadn't explored. "Emergency evacuation route. Leads to the woods on the far side of the property." They hurried down the passage as the destruction behind them accelerated. Sarah could feel the entity's energy expanding, breaking free of the physical constraints that had held it for so long. It wasn't malevolent in its destruction, simply indifferent to the human construction that had imprisoned it. The evacuation route ended at a vertical shaft similar to the entrance, but equipped with a metal ladder that zigzagged up the wall. James went first despite his injury, followed by Rebecca. Sarah came last, the blue energy surrounding her flickering as the entity's attention turned elsewhere. They emerged into the fading daylight at the edge of the woods, several hundred yards from the farmhouse. Behind them, the ground was already beginning to sink as the facility collapsed beneath it. The hollow was becoming truly hollow, the earth reclaiming what had been carved from it. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as they watched the gradual destruction of Project Echo. Rebecca smiled, taking her daughter's hand. "Now we live, Sarah. For the first time in 50 years, we live without their shadow over us." "And the entity?" James asked, gazing at the depression forming in the distance. "It's free," Sarah said simply, "moving beyond our reality, but still connected to this place, to our family." She touched her temple, where the headaches had plagued her for so long. "I can still feel it, but differently. Not pushing in, just present." As the sun set over the farm, casting long shadows across the ruined earth of the hollow, Sarah felt a strange peace settle over her. She had lost and found a mother, uncovered a legacy both terrifying and wondrous, and formed a connection with something beyond human understanding. Whatever came next, she would face it with new strength and knowledge. The widow who had gambled her last savings on an abandoned farm had found something far more valuable than land or shelter. She had found the truth and set it free. Dawn broke over the farmhouse, casting long shadows across the sagging porch where Sarah sat with a mug of steaming coffee clutched between her hands. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with the events of the previous day still burning through her mind like electrical fire. Her body ached from exertion, but it was the changes within that truly unsettled her. The connection to the entity remained, a gossamer thread linking her consciousness to something vast and ancient. It no longer pushed against her mind with desperate urgency, but whispered instead, a constant background presence like the hum of distant power lines. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Rebecca emerged, moving gingerly, one hand pressed against her side where the bullet had struck her. The wound had closed unnaturally fast, leaving only a puckered scar and phantom pain. "The old man's finally sleeping," she said, lowering herself carefully into the chair beside Sarah. "Stubborn fool refused until I checked his shoulder 3 times." Sarah nodded, studying her mother in the morning light. The resemblance between them was uncanny, the same high cheekbones, the same slight tilt to their eyes. But Rebecca's face bore the marks of hardship Sarah could scarcely imagine. Fine lines etched by years of captivity, a certain wariness in her expression, even at rest. "You really are my mother," Sarah said quietly. It wasn't a question anymore, but the reality of it still seemed impossible. Rebecca's smile was tinged with sadness. "Yes, though I haven't been much of one, have I? 20 years stolen from us." "Dad never remarried," Sarah said, the realization striking her suddenly. "He never even dated, as far as I know. He must have loved you very much." "We were young when we met, just 22. He was studying engineering. Well, officially I was studying psychology, but most of my time was spent in government facilities." Rebecca stared out at the fields, now marred by the massive sinkhole where the bunker had collapsed. "Russell was the first normal thing in my life. The program let me attend college, have some semblance of a normal existence, as long as I returned for regular assessments." "They were monitoring you the whole time?" Rebecca nodded. "From birth, after William smuggled me out of the facility, he thought he'd broken me free of their influence. But they found me again in my teens when the abilities started manifesting strongly. Made a deal with William. They'd let me live somewhat normally if he stayed quiet about what he knew, and if I cooperated with limited testing." "And he agreed?" Sarah couldn't keep the note of betrayal from her voice. "He had no choice. They'd have taken me anyway and probably killed him." Rebecca sighed. "William did his best, Sarah. Raised me with as much love and protection as he could provide. Taught me to shield my mind, to hide the full extent of my abilities from them." Sarah stared into her coffee, watching the steam rise and dissipate. "So when did they take you again?" "After the car accident." "There was no accident," Rebecca said grimly. "I was driving home from the grocery store. 3 black SUVs forced me off the road. They injected me with something before I could even fight back." Her voice grew distant. "When I woke up, I was back in the facility. They told me they'd staged my death. A fiery crash, body burned beyond recognition. Russell, and you would believe I was gone forever." "Why then? Why not earlier?" "Because of you." Rebecca reached over, brushing a strand of hair from Sarah's face with gentle fingers. "They'd been monitoring me, monitoring my pregnancy. They suspected from early scans that you would inherit the abilities, perhaps even stronger than mine. They waited until you were old enough to survive without me, then took me to continue the research." Sarah flinched away from the touch, anger flaring hot and sudden. "You've been alive all this time. Do you have any idea what it was like? Growing up without a mother, watching Dad waste away from grief until cancer finally took him?" Rebecca's hand fell back to her lap, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I tried to escape, many times. They kept me heavily sedated between sessions with the entity. When I did manage to break free of the drugs, the security was too tight. And later, when they realized I wouldn't cooperate willingly, they implanted control devices." She pulled back her hair to reveal a small scar at the base of her skull. "Neural inhibitors. One wrong move, one attempt to contact you or Russell, and they could trigger a seizure or worse." The anger drained from Sarah as quickly as it had come, leaving a hollow ache in its place. "I'm sorry, it's a lot to process." "I know." Rebecca reached for her hand again, and this time Sarah didn't pull away. "But we have a chance now to start again, to make up for lost time." Sarah nodded, though doubt crept through her mind. How did one rebuild a relationship that had effectively ended when she was 10 years old? She was a different person now, they both were. The moment was broken by the distant sound of engines. Sarah rose, shading her eyes against the morning sun. 3 vehicles approached along the dirt road, raising clouds of dust that glowed golden in the early light. "They're coming back," she said, adrenaline surging through her veins. "Mitchell's people." Rebecca stood too quickly, wincing at the pain in her side. "We need to wake James. Get ready to move." "No," Sarah said with sudden conviction. "No more running. This is my land, my home. I'm tired of people taking what's mine." She strode into the house, returning moments later with the revolver James had given her. Only 2 bullets remained after the confrontation in the bunker, but the weight of the gun provided a grim comfort nonetheless. Sarah, you don't understand, Rebecca said urgently. These aren't local deputies or even standard government agents. These are Echo Division operatives. They've been running this program for decades, outside any official oversight. They don't follow rules. Neither do I. Not anymore. Sarah checked the cylinder of the revolver before tucking it into the waistband of her jeans. I've got something they want. Something they need. That gives me leverage. As the vehicles drew closer, Sarah could make out their details. Black SUVs with government plates, identical to the ones Rebecca had described forcing her off the road 20 years earlier. The sight sent a chill through her, but she stood her ground on the porch, forcing her breathing to remain steady. The vehicles pulled up in formation, blocking the driveway. From the lead SUV emerged a tall man with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He wore a crisp black suit that seemed impervious to the dust swirling around him. Behind him, 6 agents in tactical gear took positions, their weapons not drawn but readily accessible. Director Harlo, Rebecca whispered, her face paling. He runs the entire Echo Division. If he's here personally... The man approached the porch with measured steps, his cold eyes assessing Sarah with clinical interest. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle, almost fatherly. Ms. Walsh, I think it's time we had a proper conversation, don't you? The situation yesterday became regrettably chaotic. Sarah felt Rebecca tense beside her. Chaotic? Rebecca spat. You shot me. Your men tried to kill my daughter. Director Harlow's expression didn't change. A misunderstanding. My operatives were not briefed on your relationship. They perceived a threat and responded accordingly. He turned his attention back to Sarah. What you experienced yesterday was extraordinary. Perhaps the most significant breakthrough in the program's history. We'd like to understand it better. With your cooperation, of course. My cooperation, Sarah repeated flatly. Like my mother's cooperation? 20 years of captivity and experimentation? Different times require different approaches, Harlo said smoothly. The Cold War mentality that drove the program's early years is behind us. We're more interested in partnership now. Partnership, Sarah echoed, disbelief evident in her tone. You expect me to believe that after what I saw in your facility? After what you did to my grandmother? To my mother? Harlo sighed as though dealing with a stubborn child. I understand your skepticism, but consider what happened yesterday. You achieved direct communication with the entity, something we've been working toward it for decades. More importantly, you channeled its energy without the physical deterioration previous subjects experienced. Subjects, Rebecca interjected bitterly, like lab rats. Harlo ignored her, focusing entirely on Sarah. What you've unlocked is monumental. The entity's energy has applications we've only begun to explore. Medical breakthroughs, new energy sources, advances in communication technology. We're talking about changing the course of human development. Despite herself, Sarah felt a flicker of curiosity. The entity had shown her glimpses of its knowledge, perspectives that spanned dimensions humans could barely comprehend. There was truth in what Harlo said. The potential was staggering. And if I refuse? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Harlo's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then we have a problem. The energy signature you're currently emitting is detectable for miles. Other organizations, some not particularly friendly to American interests, have their own versions of our program. They'll find you eventually. Without our protection, you and your mother would be vulnerable. Protection? Rebecca scoffed. Is that what you call imprisonment? Call it what you will, Harlo replied, his patience visibly thinning. The fact remains that Sarah now carries something of immense value, something that doesn't belong solely to her. Sarah felt the entity stir within her mind, responding to the threat in Harlo's words. The air around her seemed to thicken, taking on a subtle blue tinge that was barely perceptible in the morning light. You're wrong, she said quietly. It chose me, chose my family. For 3 generations, it's been reaching out to us specifically. Because your grandmother was the first strong psychic the program identified, Harlo countered. The initial connection was circumstantial, not destined. Sarah shook her head. No, it's more than that. It showed me everything. Its awareness of my bloodline goes back further than the program. It sensed something in us long before Eleanor Walsh ever set foot in that bunker. Harlo's expression betrayed the first hint of uncertainty. What exactly are you suggesting? Before Sarah could answer, the screen door banged open behind her. James stepped out, his wounded shoulder heavily bandaged, but his stance defiant. He carried a shotgun in his good hand, the barrel pointed carefully at the ground, but ready to be raised. She's suggesting you get the hell off this property, the old man growled. While you still can. Harlo's eyes narrowed. Sergeant Carter, still interfering in matters above your pay grade, I see. Not a sergeant anymore, James replied. Just a concerned citizen standing on private property. And you're trespassing. The agents behind Harlo shifted, hands moving subtly toward their weapons. The tension in the air was palpable, a storm about to break. Sarah felt the entity's presence intensify, responding to her fear and anger. Blue energy began to flow visibly around her hands, pulsing in time with her accelerated heartbeat. The agents froze, transfixed by the unnatural light. I don't want violence, Sarah said, struggling to keep her voice steady as power surged through her. But I will defend myself and my family. Harlo studied the energy emanating from her with undisguised fascination. Remarkable. No interface equipment, no stabilization matrix, yet you're channeling it directly. He took a step forward, seemingly unafraid. This is exactly why we need to work together, Sarah. You have the raw ability. We have the knowledge to help you control it, understand it. I understand it just fine, Sarah retorted, though in truth the energy flowing through her was becoming harder to contain. It wanted release, action, expression. It's not a tool or a weapon. It's alive, in its way, conscious, and it's made its choice. Then let me make you an offer, Harlo said, his tone shifting to one of pragmatic negotiation. Come with me, voluntarily, for 72 hours. Let our scientists run some basic tests, non-invasive, I assure you. In return, we'll provide you with full documentation of the program's history, including everything related to your grandmother and mother. Sarah hesitated, caught off guard by the unexpected proposal. Don't listen to him, Rebecca hissed. Once they have you, they'll never let you go. Times have changed, Rebecca, Harlo insisted. The political landscape, the oversight, it's different now. Sarah would be a consultant, not a prisoner. And my mother? Sarah asked. James, this property? Your mother is technically still a federal asset, Harlo said carefully. But given her age and the apparent transfer of connection to you, we could discuss conditional release. The property remains yours, of course. As for Sergeant Carter, he glanced at James with thinly veiled disdain. We have no interest in him, provided he maintains confidentiality. Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The entity's energy continued to flow through her, but it offered no guidance, no clear direction. This choice was hers alone. I need time to think, she said finally. Harlo nodded, seemingly pleased to have avoided immediate rejection. Of course. 24 hours? He reached into his suit jacket and produced a business card. Call this number when you've decided. Day or night. He placed the card on the porch railing, then backed away with a slight nod. Until tomorrow, Ms. Walsh. The agents returned to their vehicles with practiced efficiency. As the SUVs pulled away, Sarah felt the energy recede, drawing back into her like a tide returning to the sea. The absence left her lightheaded and trembling. You're not actually considering his offer, Rebecca said, disbelief evident in her voice. Sarah leaned against the porch railing, suddenly exhausted. I don't know what I'm considering. I don't know anything anymore. She looked out at the sinkhole in the distance, a physical manifestation of how her life had collapsed and reformed in the span of days. What I do know is that we can't just wish them away. They'll keep coming, with or without Harlo. James set his shotgun aside with a grimace of pain. She's right, Rebecca. Echo Division doesn't just disappear, even when their facilities collapse. They've got contingencies upon contingencies. Rebecca's expression hardened. Then we run, change our identities, go somewhere they can't find us. They found you before, Sarah pointed out gently. And now, with whatever this energy is doing to me, I'd be even easier to track. She straightened up, decision crystallizing. No, no more running, no more hiding. We need information. Everything we can get about the program, about the entity, about what's happening to me. And you think Harlo will just hand that over? Rebecca asked skeptically. Not willingly, Sarah admitted, but he might show us where to look. For either Rebecca or James could respond, a sharp pain lanced through Sarah's head, driving her to her knees. But this wasn't like the previous headaches. This was something else entirely. Images flooded her mind, too fast to process, accompanied by a sense of urgency that took her breath away. Rebecca was at her side instantly, arms supporting her. Sarah, what is it? What's happening? Sarah couldn't answer, overwhelmed by the torrent of information pouring into her consciousness. She saw a facility, different from the bunker, but similarly hidden. Men and women in lab coats hovering over equipment, cages containing something not entirely physical, energy constrained in matter. And pain, so much pain, radiating from these captive fragments of consciousness. When the vision finally released her, she was gasping, her face wet with tears. They have more, she managed to say. More pieces of it. The entity isn't just what was under the farm. That was only a fragment, a single node of a larger consciousness. They've captured others. Rebecca's face drained of color. That's not possible. The entity was unique, a singular consciousness. No, Sarah said with absolute certainty. It showed me. There are others like it, or parts of it, scattered across the country. And Harlow's people have found some of them. They're being held, studied, contained. That's why it was so desperate to reach us, to free itself. It's being vivisected. James shook his head in disbelief. If that's true, then Echo is bigger than we thought. Much bigger. And more dangerous, Rebecca added grimly. Sarah struggled to her feet, her determination hardening. We need to know what we're dealing with. All of it, not just the sanitized version Harlo would show us. How, James asked. Their records would be classified beyond anything we could access. A slow smile spread across Sarah's face. Mitchell, the local sheriff. He's been Harlo's eyes and ears in Millerville for years. He must have files, communications, something we can use. Rebecca looked dubious. Even if he does, how do we get to them? Walk into the sheriff's office and ask politely? No, Sarah said, the beginnings of a plan taking shape in her mind. We wait until dark. The entity can help us. I can feel it wanting to help. It showed me those other facilities for a reason. James and Rebecca exchanged concerned glances. Sarah, her mother said carefully, the entity isn't human. Its goals, its morality, they're not the same as ours. You need to be careful about trusting it completely. I don't trust it completely, Sarah replied, but right now its interests align with ours. It wants its other fragments freed. We want answers and leverage against Harlo. We can help each other. As darkness fell over the farm, Sarah stood before the bedroom mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her. 3 days ago, she had been a desperate widow gambling her last savings on an abandoned property. Now she was something else entirely. Conduit to an ancient consciousness, daughter to a woman returned from the dead, and soon, if all went as planned, a thief of government secrets. She closed her eyes, reaching for the entity's presence within her mind. It responded immediately, unfurling like a flower opening to the sun. The connection was stronger now, more controlled. She could access its energy without the overwhelming surge that had characterized their earlier interactions. Blue light spilled from her fingertips, casting eerie shadows across the bedroom walls. With careful concentration, she directed it to surround her completely, then willed it to bend the light around her body. Her reflection in the mirror blurred, then seemed to vanish altogether, leaving only a slight distortion in the air where she stood. It worked, she whispered, watching the blur in the mirror shift with her movement. The bedroom door opened and Rebecca entered, stopping short at the apparent emptiness of the room. Sarah? Here, Sarah said, releasing the energy field. She flickered back into visibility, the blue glow receding into her skin. Rebecca stared, clearly shaken. That's new. The entity showed me how, Sarah explained. It's not true invisibility, more like bending light around me. It won't work on cameras, and anyone looking directly at me would see a distortion. But in the dark, it should be enough, Rebecca finished, looking both impressed and concerned. James has the truck ready. Mitchell should be on his usual dinner break. His deputy mans the front desk, but the back entrance to the records room has a lock even I could pick. Sarah nodded, retrieving the backpack she'd prepared. In and out in 20 minutes. Focus on anything related to Echo Division, Project Echo, or unusual incidents in the county. Are you sure you're up for this? Rebecca asked, studying her daughter's face. The energy manipulation, it takes a toll. Eleanor used to get nosebleeds, migraines. I'm fine, Sarah insisted, though in truth she felt a bone-deep weariness. The entity is helping, acting as a buffer somehow. It's learned from its mistakes with grandmother and you. The drive to Millerville took less than 15 minutes, James's old truck rumbling down back roads to avoid notice. They parked 2 blocks from the sheriff's office, in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse. Remember, James said as they prepared to separate, 20 minutes, any longer, and I'm coming in after you. Sarah nodded, feeling surprisingly calm despite the danger ahead. The entity's presence was a steady pulse at the back of her mind, alert but not intrusive. The sheriff's office occupied a small brick building on the edge of town, its windows glowing yellow against the night. Sarah and Rebecca circled around to the rear entrance, keeping to the shadows. As predicted, the back door featured a simple deadbolt lock that Rebecca dealt with efficiently, using a set of picks produced from her pocket. Old habits, she murmured at Sarah's raised eyebrow. You find ways to resist, even with neural inhibitors. The door swung open silently, revealing a darkened hallway. Sarah concentrated, drawing on the entity's energy until the blue glow surrounded her, then bent the light as she had practiced. The distortion spread to include Rebecca when her mother gripped her hand. I can see you, Rebecca whispered, sounding surprised. Faintly, but clearly. Blood connection, Sarah guessed. The entity recognizes you as part of me. They moved through the hallway cautiously, passing a break room where a young deputy sat scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the distortion moving past the doorway. The records room was at the end of the corridor, its door marked with a simple plaque. This lock proved more challenging, but Rebecca managed it after a tense minute of manipulation. Inside, metal filing cabinets lined the walls, and a computer sat on a desk in the corner, its screensaver casting a ghostly glow over the room. You check the computer, Rebecca directed. I'll look through the physical files. Sarah moved to the desk, releasing the light-bending energy to free her concentration for the task ahead. The computer was password protected, but the entity surged forward in her mind, showing her patterns, connections, possibilities. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, inputting a sequence she couldn't have consciously known. The screen unlocked, revealing a standard county sheriff's interface. Sarah navigated to the secured files section, again letting the entity guide her through the security protocols. Folders appeared, organized by year and case type. She filtered for anything unusual, anything that might connect to Echo Division. A folder labeled Special Jurisdictional Arrangements caught her attention. Inside were documents detailing areas of the county where Sheriff's Department patrols were restricted, including the land around her farm. The most recent entry was dated just 3 days ago, the day she had purchased the property. They knew I was coming, she murmured. They were tracking me before I even arrived. Another file contained communications between Mitchell and various government agencies, most with redacted sections. But one email thread remained partially readable, discussing asset acquisition and Walsh bloodline confirmation. The messages referenced genetic testing performed without her knowledge or consent, samples taken from medical visits, routine blood work, even a swab from a coffee cup she'd used at a cafe. They had been hunting her for years, waiting for the right moment to draw her in. Sarah, Rebecca called softly from across the room. You need to see this. She held a thick file labeled Operation Wayfinder. Inside were maps of the county with several locations marked in red, including the farm. Each marked site had geological surveys attached, detailing unusual energy readings and magnetic anomalies. They're not just looking for the entity, Sarah realized. They're looking for more like it. The fragments it showed me. Rebecca nodded grimly. And they're using people like us to find them. Look at this. She handed Sarah a sheet of paper listing names, dates, and locations. Some names were crossed out, others circled. Sarah recognized one immediately, her own, with yesterday's date next to it and the word confirmed stamped in red. A watch list, Rebecca explained, people with potential psychic sensitivity who might lead them to more entities. Sarah scanned the list, freezing when she spotted another familiar name. Thomas Miller. My husband's name is here. Dated 2 years after his supposed death. Rebecca peered at the entry. There's a note, testing inconclusive, continue surveillance. Thomas died 6 years ago, Sarah said, her voice hollow. Or at least that's what they made me believe. This proves they've been monitoring him after staging his death. A chill ran down her spine as another possibility surfaced. Unless, the thought was interrupted by the sound of the front door of the building opening, followed by heavy footsteps in the main office. Mitchell's voice carried down the hallway, gruff and annoyed. Just forgot some paperwork, Stevens. I'll be out in 5. Sarah and Rebecca exchanged alarmed glances. The footsteps approached the records room, keys jangling. Hide, Rebecca mouthed, moving swiftly behind the door. Sarah grabbed the files they'd been examining and ducked beneath the desk, calling on the entity's energy to bend light around her once more. The door swung open and Sheriff Mitchell entered, flipping on the light switch. He moved directly to the filing cabinet Rebecca had been searching, apparently not noticing that it was already partially open. As he rifled through the drawer, Rebecca slipped silently from behind the door and into the hallway. Sarah remained frozen beneath the desk, scarcely daring to breathe. Mitchell pulled a file from the cabinet, then turned toward the desk where she hid. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was looking directly at her, his eyes narrowing as if he sensed something amiss. Then his radio crackled to life on his belt. Sheriff, we've got a situation at the Walsh farm. Multiple vehicles reported, lights in the fields. Mitchell grabbed the radio. Echo Division? Negative, came the reply. Different plates. Looks like private security, maybe government contractors. Mitchell swore under his breath. Harlo's competition. Tell Stevens to get the roadblocks ready. No one in or out without my approval. He hurried from the room, leaving the door ajar in his haste. Sarah waited until his footsteps faded before emerging from her hiding place, still clutching the files. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her expression tense. We need to go. Now. They slipped out the back door just as sirens began to wail from the front of the building. James was already waiting in the truck, engine running. What happened? He demanded as they scrambled inside. Someone else is at the farm, Sarah explained breathlessly as they pulled away. Not Harlo's people. Someone else who knows about the entity. James accelerated, taking back roads toward the farm. The entity is valuable. Stands to reason Echo isn't the only group interested. Sarah opened one of the files they'd taken, scanning it quickly by the glow of her phone. According to this, there are at least 3 private organizations and 2 foreign governments with active psychic research programs similar to Project Echo, all looking for the same energy sources. The Cold War never really ended, Rebecca said bitterly, just changed battlefields. As they crested this final hill before the farm, they saw the vehicles, sleek black SUVs with tinted windows positioned around the property. Men in tactical gear swept the fields with specialized equipment, focusing particularly on the massive sinkhole where the bunker had collapsed. Who are they? Sarah whispered. Rebecca's face had gone pale in the dashboard light. I recognize those insignias, Helix Foundation. They're a private research group specializing in fringe science. They approached the government about partnership with the Project Echo in the 90s, but were rejected as too unstable, too radical in their methods. What do they want? James asked, pulling the truck off the road into the shadow of a stand of trees. The same thing Echo wants, Rebecca replied grimly. A conduit, someone who can communicate with and channel the entity's energy, but their approach is less restrained. Sarah watched the Helix operatives methodically searching her property, anger building within her. This is my home. I'm tired of people treating it like public property. The entity stirred in response to her emotion, energy beginning to gather beneath her skin. The files in her lap started to glow faintly with reflected blue light. Sarah, Rebecca warned, be careful. If they detect that energy signature, let them detect it, Sarah said, a new resolve hardening within her. I'm done hiding, done running. These people, Harlo, Helix, all of them, they've been manipulating my family for generations, using us, hunting us. She turned to her mother, eyes bright with determination in the faint glow of the entity's power. It's time we stopped being the hunted and became the hunters. The entity surged in agreement, filling her with a sense of righteous purpose. In the stolen files on her lap, the answers to decades of secrets waited to be uncovered. And somewhere, perhaps even in those same pages, lay the truth about a husband who might not be as dead as she had believed. The Helix Foundation operatives moved with military precision across Sarah's property, their equipment casting eerie blue-white beams through the pre-dawn darkness. From their vantage point in the tree line, Sarah, Rebecca, and James watched as the team converged on the massive sinkhole where the bunker had collapsed. They're looking for fragments, Sarah whispered, the entity's knowledge flowing through her mind, pieces of the consciousness that might have survived the collapse. Rebecca nodded grimly. Standard protocol. When a containment site is compromised, recovery teams try to salvage what they can. Any piece of the entity, no matter how small, is valuable. How do we get past them? James asked, checking the ammunition in his shotgun. There must be 15 men out there. Sarah studied the scene, formulating a plan. We don't need to get past them. We need to drive them away. She turned to her mother. Can you still connect with the entity, even partially? Rebecca hesitated. I'm not sure. After you freed it, my connection felt severed, but I can still sense something, an echo. That might be enough, Sarah said. If we can create a distraction, make them think the entity's energy is manifesting somewhere else on the property, they'll redirect their search. And go where exactly? James asked skeptically. Sarah pointed to the far side of the property where the family cemetery stood shrouded in mist. There, it's far enough from the house that we can slip in while they're investigating. Rebecca closed her eyes, concentrating. After a moment, a faint blue glow began to emanate from her fingertips, weaker than Sarah's energy, but visible in the darkness. I can try, she said, voice strained, but not for long. The connection isn't stable. They circled through the woods, staying low and moving silently until they reached a point directly behind the cemetery. Sarah placed her hands on her mother's shoulders, focusing on the thread of energy that connected them both to the entity. Let me help, she whispered. Power flowed from Sarah into Rebecca, the blue light intensifying around both women. Rebecca gasped at the sensation, then directed the energy outward, sending it arcing over the headstones in a ghostly display. The effect was immediate. Shouts rang out from the Helix team as their instruments detected the energy spike. Flashlight beams swung toward the cemetery, and operatives began running in that direction, weapons drawn. Now, James urged, already moving toward the house. They sprinted across the open field, using the distraction to reach the back porch undetected. Once inside, Sarah locked the door and quickly drew the curtains. We don't have much time, she said, spreading the stolen files across the kitchen table. They'll realize it was a diversion soon enough. The three of them worked quickly, scanning documents by the light of a single lamp turned low. The files painted a disturbing picture of decades-long surveillance and manipulation. Project Echo had begun in the 1950s as a Cold War initiative to develop psychic warfare capabilities, but had evolved into something far more complex when researchers discovered the entity beneath the original facility. Look at this, James said, holding up a faded photograph. It showed a young Eleanor Walsh standing beside several military officers and scientists, all gathered around what appeared to be a glowing blue crystal suspended in a containment field. This is before they built the bunker. They found something in the caves first. Rebecca studied the image. A physical anchor, she murmured. The entity exists primarily as energy, but it creates physical manifestations, crystalline structures that act as focal points for its consciousness. That's what they're looking for now, Sarah realized. Not just energy readings, but physical fragments. As they continued searching, Sarah uncovered a list of names, Walsh bloodline descendants who had been monitored over generations. Her name was there, along with her mother's and grandmother's. But another name caught her eye. Thomas E. Miller with an address in western Montana. "This can't be right," she whispered, her hands trembling. "Thomas Miller was Eric's name before we married. But he died, oh, I saw him in the morgue. I identified his body." Rebecca took the paper, her expression grim. "The program has resources you can't imagine, Sarah. Falsifying a death is simple for them. They've done it before." She touched her own name on the list. "They did it to me." "But why?" Sarah demanded, grief and confusion warring within her. "Why take Eric? He wasn't part of the Walsh bloodline." "He was connected to you," James said quietly. "Maybe that was enough. Or maybe they discovered something about him that made him valuable." Sarah's mind raced, recalling the headaches Eric had sometimes complained about, the vivid dreams he'd described that had seemed so similar to her own. Had he been developing abilities too? Had her connection to the entity somehow awakened something in him as well? Before she could voice these thoughts, the kitchen window exploded inward in a shower of glass. A small, cylindrical object clattered across the floor, releasing a thick cloud of gas. "Tear gas!" James shouted, pulling his shirt over his nose. "Get out! Back door!" They scrambled toward the rear of the house, eyes streaming, lungs burning. As they reached the back porch, the front door crashed open. Helix operatives poured in, faces hidden behind tactical masks. "Run for the woods!" Rebecca gasped, pushing Sarah ahead of her. "Don't let them take you!" They sprinted across the open yard, the entity's energy surging through Sarah in response to the danger. She channeled it outward, creating a shimmering blue barrier between them and their pursuers. Bullets struck the energy field, flattening and dropping harmlessly to the ground. They had almost reached the tree line when a blinding light swept over them from above. A helicopter hovered overhead, its spotlight pinning them like insects on display. From speakers mounted on its underside came a voice, distorted but commanding. "Sarah Walsh, we are not here to harm you. We're here to protect you from Echo Division." "Don't listen," Rebecca shouted over the roar of the rotors. "It's a standard Helix tactic. Pretend to be rescuers." The helicopter descended, kicking up a vortex of dust and debris. Helix operatives had formed a perimeter, cutting off any escape to the woods. Sarah's energy shield flickered as her concentration wavered, her strength depleting rapidly. James raised his shotgun, taking aim at the nearest operatives, but Sarah placed a hand on the barrel, pushing it down. "No," she said, a strange calm settling over her. "There's another way." She closed her eyes, surrendering completely to the connection that had been building since her arrival at the farm. Unlike before, she didn't just access a trickle of the entity's power. She immersed herself fully in its consciousness. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Suddenly, she could perceive the entire network of fragments across the continent, each one a distinct node of awareness pulsing with its own rhythm. And there, shining more brightly than the others, a fragment in Montana intertwined with a familiar human consciousness. Thomas. Eric, her husband, somehow connected to another piece of the entity. Power exploded outward from Sarah in a concussive wave, knocking the Helix operatives off their feet and sending the helicopter into a dangerous spin. The blue energy expanded in a perfect dome over the entire property, sealing it from intrusion. When Sarah opened her eyes, they glowed with an unearthly light. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that weren't entirely human. "This ends now," she declared, the sound carrying effortlessly over the helicopter's noise. "This land is under my protection. You will leave, or I will force you to leave." The Helix commander's voice crackled over the loudspeaker again, less confident now. "Ms. Walsh, you don't understand the forces you are dealing with. Echo Division is hunting you. Director Harlo has authorized your termination if you can't be controlled." "I am not concerned with Harlo," Sarah replied, the entity's ancient patience lending weight to her words. "Nor with you. I have seen the truth of what you both seek, and I will not allow either of you to continue exploiting what you do not understand." The energy dome pulsed, contracts and expands in a heartbeat. The helicopter's engines sputtered, then died completely. It dropped like a stone, the pilot barely managing to execute a rough landing at the edge of the property. The operative's equipment sparked and failed, communication devices going silent. "You have one chance," Sarah continued, advancing toward the downed helicopter. "Leave this place. Do not return. Do not pursue me or any member of my family again. The Helix commander emerged from the helicopter, removing his tactical mask to reveal a face lined with age and hard experience. You think it's that simple, he asked, genuine curiosity in his tone, that we'll just walk away from decades of research, from the most significant discovery in human history? I think you have no choice, Sarah replied. With a gesture, she lifted the man several feet off the ground, suspending him in a cocoon of blue energy. The entity is not yours to study or control. It never was. Fear flickered across the commander's face for the first time. What are you? Sarah smiled, the expression somehow not quite human. I am becoming something new, neither fully human nor fully other, a bridge between worlds. She released him suddenly, letting him fall to his knees. Now go, and tell whoever sent you that the Walsh family is no longer your concern. The commander staggered to his feet, gesturing for his team to retreat. Within minutes, the Helix operatives had gathered their damaged equipment and loaded into their remaining vehicles, leaving the helicopter abandoned in the field. As they disappeared down the long driveway, the energy dome around the property faded. Sarah swayed, her knees buckling as the entity's presence receded to its normal background level. Rebecca caught her before she could fall. Sarah, are you still you? Her mother asked cautiously. Sarah nodded, exhaustion washing over her in waves. Still me, just more. She looked toward the horizon where the first light of dawn was breaking. But I saw something when I connected fully with the entity. I saw Eric. James approached, his expression concerned. What do you mean you saw him? He's alive, Sarah said with absolute certainty. In Montana, near another fragment of the entity. I could feel him, connected to it somehow, just as I'm connected to this one. Rebecca helped Sarah to a nearby tree stump where she sat heavily. If that's true, then everything is more complicated than we thought. If Echo has been keeping Eric alive, using him to study another fragment, then they have a much larger operation than even you knew about, James finished. Sarah pulled the Montana address from her pocket. The paper crumpled, but still readable. We need to go there, find Eric, understand what's really happening. Rebecca shook her head. It's not that simple. After what just happened, both Helix and Echo will be mobilizing everything they have to find you. The energy signature you just generated could probably be detected from orbit. We'd never make it to Montana without being intercepted. Unless we had help, Sarah said thoughtfully. She closed her eyes, reaching for the entity's presence. Can you shield us? She asked silently. Hide our energy from detection? The response came not in words but in impressions, a sense of possibility, of methods to dampen the energy's visibility to human instruments. It would require constant concentration, a delicate balance of containment without suppression. It thinks we can do it, Sarah said, opening her eyes. If we're careful, if I maintain control. James looked skeptical. That's a big if, considering what just happened. You nearly went supernova out there. I was reacting instinctively, Sarah countered. Now I understand better how to regulate the connection. It's like learning to whisper instead of shout. The entity itself wants to remain undetected right now. It's showing me how. Rebecca studied her daughter's face, recognizing the determination there. The same stubborn resolve Eleanor had shown decades earlier. We'll need supplies, transportation that can't be easily tracked, and a route that avoids major population centers where surveillance would be heaviest. I know someone who might help, James offered. Former sergeant from my unit. Runs a garage about 50 miles from here. Owes me more than a few favors, and he's no fan of government overreach. Sarah nodded decisively. Then we leave within the hour, before Harlo gets wind of what happened here. As they gathered essentials for the journey, Sarah returned to the kitchen table, quickly sorting through the remaining files. One document caught her attention, a report detailing the initial discovery of the entity's fragments across North America. According to the report, the first fragment had been found not beneath her farm, as she'd assumed, but in Montana, the very region where Eric was supposedly located. The bunker here had been built after Eleanor demonstrated unusual psychic sensitivity to energy readings from that original site. The pieces were starting to connect. Eleanor's abilities, Rebecca's captivity, Sarah's own developing powers, all were part of a larger pattern centered around the entity and its scattered consciousness. And somehow Eric was a crucial part of that pattern too. "Ready?" Rebecca asked from the doorway, a packed bag slung over her shoulder. Sarah nodded, tucking the most important documents into her backpack. "As ready as I can be." Outside, the rising sun illuminated the devastation wrought during the confrontation. Scorched earth where energy had discharged, the abandoned helicopter, broken windows in the farmhouse. It no longer resembled the peaceful refuge Sarah had hoped to find when she'd bid on the property days earlier. James pulled his truck around, its tank freshly filled from the farm's emergency supply. "We should head north first," he suggested. "Double back west later to throw off any pursuit." As they prepared to leave, Sarah paused, looking back at the farmhouse. Despite everything that had happened there, she felt a strange reluctance to abandon it. The land had called to her for a reason, had drawn her back to her family's legacy. "We'll return," Rebecca said softly, reading her daughter's expression. "When this is over, when we understand what's really happening, we'll come back." Sarah nodded, touching the weathered porch railing one last time. "It's not just a house anymore," she said. "It's part of who I am, who we are." The entity stirred within her mind as if in agreement. This place was significant, a nexus point in its fragmented existence, one of many they would need to visit before the truth was fully revealed. They drove away as the sun crested the eastern hills, casting long shadows across the property. Sarah concentrated on dampening her energy signature, drawing it inward until it was barely perceptible even to her own senses. The effort was exhausting, but necessary if they were to evade detection. Several miles down the road, James suddenly tensed, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "We've got company," he muttered. "Black SUV, coming up fast." Sarah turned to look. The vehicle was still distant, but gaining rapidly. "Echo or Helix?" "Neither," Rebecca said, leaning forward for a better view. "That's Sheriff Mitchell's personal vehicle." James accelerated, the old truck's engine protesting. "If Mitchell's following us, it means Harlo already knows what happened. They'll have roadblocks set up on all major routes out of the county." "Take the next right," Sarah instructed, recalling the mental map the entity had shown her. "There's an old logging road that connects to the state highway. It's overgrown but passable." James raised an eyebrow but followed her direction, turning sharply onto a nearly hidden dirt track. The truck bounced violently as they navigated the rutted path, branches scraping against the windows. Mitchell's SUV skidded around the corner behind them, still in pursuit. Through the rear window, Sarah could see the sheriff speaking urgently into a radio. "He's calling for backup," she said. "We need to lose him now." Rebecca twisted in her seat, her face set with determination. "I can slow him down. I still have enough of a connection for that." Before Sarah could protest, her mother had rolled down the window and extended her hand. A pulse of blue energy, weaker than Sarah's but still potent, shot from her palm, striking the ground behind the truck. The dirt road erupted upward, creating a barricade of earth and broken trees. Mitchell's SUV swerved to avoid the sudden obstacle, sliding sideways into a ditch. The last they saw of him, he was climbing out of the vehicle, his face a mask of fury as he watched them escape. Rebecca collapsed back into her seat, pale and shaking from the effort. "That won't hold him for long," she gasped, "but it might give us enough of a head start." The logging road eventually joined a larger gravel track, which in turn led to a state highway cutting through dense forest. James drove with grim concentration, pushing the truck as fast as he dared on the winding road. "James's friend is in Oakidge," Rebecca explained as they traveled. "About 3 hours from here if we can maintain this pace. From there we can switch vehicles, pick up supplies, and chart a course for Montana." Macy nodded, dividing her attention between watching for pursuit and maintaining the dampening field around her energy signature. The entity helped, showing her how to modulate the power flowing through her, how to contain it without suppressing it entirely. "Do you think Eric is being held prisoner?" she asked after a long silence. "Like you were?" Rebecca's expression softened with sympathy, mine. "I don't know, Sarah. The program evolved over time. By the 1990s, they had developed more subtle methods of control." She touched the back of her neck where the neural inhibitor had been implanted. "He might not even realize he's being monitored." The possibility was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Sarah remembered Eric's gradual withdrawal in the year before his supposed death, how he'd become distant, prone to long silences and unexplained absences. At the time, she'd attributed it to stress, to the financial struggles they'd been facing. Now she wondered if Echo had already been influencing him, preparing to extract him from her life. Why not take me too, she wondered aloud. If they knew about my connection to the entity, why leave me behind? Because you weren't ready, James suggested from behind the wheel. The abilities tend to strengthen with age, with life experience. Eleanor was in her 40s when she achieved her strongest connection. Rebecca was in her 30s. They were playing the long game, Rebecca added, watching you, waiting for the right moment. The eviction notice, the conveniently available farm at auction. I wouldn't be surprised if they engineered those circumstances to guide you exactly where they wanted you. The thought was chilling, the idea that every hardship in her life might have been orchestrated, every apparent coincidence carefully planned. Even her deepest grief, the loss of her husband, had been a manipulation. When we find Eric, she said, her voice hardening, when we understand what's really happening, Harlo and everyone involved in this program will answer for what they've done to our family. The entity stirred within her, resonating with her determination. Images flashed through her mind, other facilities like the bunker, scattered across the country, other fragments of its consciousness held in containment. Other families like the Walshes, manipulated and exploited for generations. It's bigger than just us, she realized aloud. There are others, other bloodlines connected to other fragments. Rebecca nodded grimly. I suspected as much. Echo compartmentalizes everything, need-to-know basis only. Even after 20 years in the program, there was so much they kept from me. We'll find them, Sarah promised, as much to the entity as to her mother. All of them. As they crested a hill, the highway stretching before them like a ribbon through the endless forest, Sarah felt a strange sense of purpose settle over her. The widow who had gambled her last savings on an abandoned farm was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who understood that family wasn't just about blood, but about shared struggle and shared destiny. The entity had chosen the Walshes 3 generations ago. Now Sarah Walsh was choosing to embrace that legacy fully, with all its dangers and responsibilities. And the first step was finding the husband she'd thought was lost forever. The road to Montana stretched before them, 1,000 miles of uncertainty and peril. But for the first time since Eric's disappearance, Sarah felt the stirring of genuine hope. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and she would not rest until she had found it. As they drove westward, the entity within her seemed to hum with anticipation. Its fragmented consciousness had waited decades for this journey to begin. Now, through Sarah, it would finally be made whole again. And in the process, perhaps she would become whole as well. Oakidge is just ahead, James announced as they rounded a bend in the road. My friend's garage is on the outskirts. We should be safe there, at least for a few hours. Sarah nodded, her determination solidifying into resolve. Montana awaited, Eric awaited, and beyond that, answers to questions she was only beginning to formulate. Whatever came next, she would face it with the strength of 3 generations of Walsh women behind her, and the power of something ancient and vast flowing through her veins. The hunt had begun. James's friend turned out to be a grizzled veteran named Mike Donovan, who ran a cluttered garage on the outskirts of Oakidge. His weathered face registered no surprise when they arrived, dust-covered and exhausted, in James's battered truck. Figured you'd show up sooner or later, he said, ushering them quickly inside through a back entrance. Your face is all over the emergency channels, Miss Walsh. Some kind of domestic terrorism charge they're cooking up. Sarah's stomach dropped. Already? It's barely been 6 hours. Welcome to the digital age, Mike replied, securing the heavy door behind them. They've got facial recognition running on every traffic cam and security system from here to the Canadian border. The garage's back room had been converted into a sparse living space, folding cots, a small kitchenette, and walls lined with radio equipment and monitors displaying various security feeds. It reminded Sarah of a military command center, or perhaps a paranoid survivalist's bunker. Mike's been off the grid since '99, James explained, noting her expression. Believes the government's been compromised by forces beyond our understanding. Not so crazy now, is it? Mike said without a hint of smugness. He gestured to a monitor showing a news broadcast. Sarah's driver's license photo was displayed prominently beside footage of her farm, where several official vehicles were now parked. The caption read, "Manhunt underway for suspected domestic terrorist." Rebecca stepped closer to the screen. "They're moving with unusual urgency," Rebecca noted, studying the broadcast. "This isn't Echo's typical measured approach. They're adapting," Sarah realized. What happened at the farm wasn't just a security breach. It was a demonstration that their containment protocols are obsolete. I displayed abilities they thought impossible without their equipment. That's a threat to their entire operation, not just a single asset escape. "Which makes our next move tricky," James said, spreading a roadmap across a worn table. "We need to reach Montana, but every major route will be watched." Mike stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I might have a solution to part of your problem." He led them through a side door into the main garage, where several vehicles sat in various states of repair. At the far end, covered by a tarp, was a nondescript delivery van with faded lettering on the side. "Faraday cage on wheels," Mike explained, pulling back the tarp to reveal a vehicle that looked entirely ordinary from the outside. "Built it for a client who never came back to claim it. Interior is lined with a mesh that blocks electromagnetic signals. No tracking, no radio frequency, no energy signatures in or out." Sarah approached the van cautiously. "You think it would contain the entity's energy?" "Worth a try," Mike suggested. "At the very least, it would hide any electronic devices you're carrying, make you ghosts on the grid." Rebecca circled the vehicle, examining it with a practiced eye. "It might work, temporarily at least, long enough to get us beyond the immediate search perimeter." Sarah placed her hand against the van's metal side, reaching out to the entity within her. "Would this contain your energy?" she asked silently. "Could we hide this way?" The response was uncertain, a mixture of possibilities and limitations. The energy could be partially contained, but not indefinitely. Like water finding cracks in a dam, it would eventually seep through. "It's not perfect," she reported, "but it might buy us time." "Time is what we need," James said. "That in a route that keeps us away from cities and major checkpoints." Mike unfolded a larger map across the hood of the van. "There's an old network of logging roads that connects through the national forests. Not on GPS, barely maintained, but passable in the right vehicle. You could make it all the way to the Idaho border without hitting a single traffic camera." He traced a winding path with his finger. "From there, you'd need to cross about 20 miles of open country before picking up another Forest Service road. It's not comfortable and it'll take 3 times as long as the highways, but it's your best shot at staying invisible." Sarah studied the route, committing it to memory. "How soon can we leave?" "After dark," Mike advised. "Less traffic, easier to spot tails. Meanwhile, you should all get some rest. Looks like you've been through hell already." While James and Mike prepared the van, loading it with supplies and checking the mechanical systems, Sarah and Rebecca took turns cleaning up in the small bathroom adjoining the living quarters. The mirror revealed a Sarah barely recognizable to herself, hair matted with dust and sweat, dark circles under her eyes, and most disconcertingly, a faint blue glow that seemed to emanate from just beneath her skin when she concentrated. "The physical changes are beginning," Rebecca observed from the doorway. "It happened to Eleanor too, near the end. The prolonged exposure to the entity's energy alters human physiology." Sarah touched her face, watching the blue light pulse beneath her fingertips. "Is it dangerous?" "Eleanor thought it was evolutionary," Rebecca said carefully. "An adaptation allowing the human body to channel more energy without burning out. But the process was never completed in her case, or in mine. Because they pushed too hard," Sarah guessed, "forced the connection beyond what was natural." Rebecca nodded. "The entity was trying to prepare us, generation by generation. But Echo was impatient, demanding results on their timeline, not ours." She stepped closer, examining the luminescence beneath Sarah's skin. "You've already progressed further than either of us did. Your connection is stronger, more stable." "Because the entity had more time to prepare me," Sarah realized. "Even when I didn't know about it, it was reaching out, establishing the connection gradually. And because you embraced it willingly," Rebecca added. "Neither Eleanor nor I had that luxury. We were always fighting against Echo, against the fear of what was happening to us." She touched Sarah's hand gently. You chose this path. That makes all the difference. Sarah considered this as she changed into clean clothes Mike had provided, worn but serviceable jeans, a flannel shirt, and a heavy jacket suitable for the mountain roads ahead. The entity's presence was a constant companion now. Its awareness merged with hers in ways both subtle and profound. She could sense its fragments scattered across the continent, could feel the pull of the one in Montana most strongly, and connected to that fragment, a familiar consciousness. Eric, her husband, alive but changed, just as she had been changed. I need to know what to expect, she said to Rebecca as they packed their few belongings. When we find Eric, if he's been connected to the entity like I have, what will he be like? Rebecca's expression grew troubled. I can't say for certain. Each fragment of the entity has its own character, for lack of a better word, its own priorities and perspective. How that shapes the human connected to it depends on too many variables. But you must have seen others, Sarah pressed, in your time with Echo, other subjects. Rebecca was silent for a long moment before answering. Yes, there were others. Most didn't survive the process. Those who did were changed fundamentally. Some became almost oracular, seeing patterns across time and space. Others developed different abilities: telekinesis, biokinesis, energy manipulation, like what you've demonstrated. And their minds, their personalities? Altered, Rebecca admitted. How much depended on the individual? Strong-willed subjects maintained more of their original identity. Others became something else entirely, neither fully human nor fully entity. Sarah absorbed this, trying to prepare herself for what might await in Montana. The Eric she had known had been kind, practical, with a quiet strength that had anchored her through difficult times. Would any of that remain? Would he even recognize her? We'll leave at nightfall, James announced, entering the room. Mike's got the van ready. Says we should plan for at least 3 days of hard driving to reach the Montana location, assuming we don't run into trouble. We'll run into trouble, Rebecca said grimly. The question is just what kind and when. As darkness fell, they loaded their supplies into the van. Mike had provided them with food, water, first aid supplies, and several burner phones with prepaid cards. Don't use them unless absolutely necessary, he warned, and even then, keep calls under 30 seconds. They might not be able to track the energy signature while you're in the van, but standard telecommunications monitoring is still a risk. He handed James a small leather pouch. Extra ammunition for your shotgun. And this. He pulled out an old revolver similar to the one James had given Sarah. For the lady, seems she knows how to handle herself. Sarah accepted the weapon, checking it with practiced movements that surprised even her. The entity provided the knowledge she realized, drawing on memories from Eleanor, who had been taught to shoot by William during their time with the program. One more thing, Mike said, producing a small device from his pocket. Signal jammer, military grade. If you run into a checkpoint or drone surveillance, this will buy you about 3 minutes of electronic blindness. Use it wisely, it's a one-shot deal. With final handshakes and terse good wishes, they climbed into the van. James took the wheel with Rebecca navigating and Sarah in the back where the Faraday cage shielding was strongest. As the garage door rolled up, Sarah felt the entity's energy surge within her, then stabilize as the shielding took effect. It's working, she confirmed, at least partially. I can feel the dampening effect. They pulled out into the night, headlights off until they cleared the immediate vicinity of town. The logging road Mike had recommended was barely more than a dirt track cutting through dense forest, forcing James to drive at a crawl, using only minimal lights to illuminate the way. The hours passed in tense silence, each of them absorbed in their own thoughts as the van jostled over the rugged terrain. Occasionally they would pass abandoned equipment, rusting logging machinery half swallowed by vegetation, testament to an industry long since moved on. Near midnight, they stopped briefly to switch drivers, Rebecca taking the wheel while James rested. Sarah remained in the back, maintaining her concentration on containing the entity's energy. The effort was exhausting but necessary, like holding one's breath underwater, muscles burning with the strain. How are you holding up? Rebecca asked during one of their brief stops to stretch and refuel from the wet cans Mike had provided. Sarah rolled her shoulders, trying to ease the tension that had built there. I'm okay. The entity is helping, showing me how to modulate the energy, but it's getting harder to contain. Your body is adapting, Rebecca observed, producing more energy as it becomes more efficient at channeling the connection. It's a natural progression, but it means the shielding will become less effective over time. How long until it fails completely? Rebecca frowned, calculating. At this rate, maybe 36 hours, less if you're forced to use any significant amount of power. Then we need to move faster, Sarah decided. Take more direct routes, even if it means increased risk of detection. They pressed on through the night, gradually making their way northeast into the rugged terrain of the Cascade Mountains. The logging roads became increasingly primitive, in some places little more than game trails barely wide enough for the van. Several times they had to stop to clear fallen trees or navigate around washouts. Dawn broke as they reached the eastern slopes, the forest thinning as they descended toward the high desert plateau of Central Oregon. Here the terrain offered less cover, forcing them to time their movements carefully, sticking to low ground and avoiding the sparse highways that crossed the region. It was mid-morning when they encountered their first roadblock, a checkpoint established where a Forest Service road intersected with a county highway. Two police cruisers and a black SUV that screamed federal involvement were positioned across the junction, officers checking each vehicle that passed. James slowed the van, pulling behind a stand of juniper trees a quarter-mile from the checkpoint. They've got the crossing covered, he reported after surveying the situation through binoculars. And I'd bet good money they've got our descriptions. Can we go around? Sarah asked, studying the map. Rebecca shook her head. Not without backtracking 30 miles, and even then they're likely watching all the major crossings in the region. Sarah closed her eyes, reaching out to the entity. Can you show me another way? She asked silently. Images flowed into her mind, topographical features, hidden valleys, dry creek beds that could serve as pathways. The entity had an intimate knowledge of the land, accumulated over millennia of existence beneath it. There, she said, pointing to a seemingly featureless expanse of sagebrush on the map. There's a dry wash that runs parallel to the highway for about 5 miles. It's deep enough to conceal the van if we're careful. James looked dubious. You sure? Nothing on the map shows a wash in that area. I'm sure, Sarah replied with quiet confidence. The entity knows this land, all of it. They backtracked to a barely visible turnoff, then followed Sarah's directions across increasingly rough terrain until they found the wash, a deep erosion channel cut into the earth, its steep sides offering perfect concealment from the road above. The van handled the rough ground better than expected, its suspension creaking but holding as James navigated the narrow confines of the wash. After nearly an hour of slow progress, they emerged well beyond the checkpoint, rejoining a secondary road that would take them northeast toward the Idaho border. That was too close, Rebecca said, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. They're establishing a perimeter, tightening the net. We need to assume they've anticipated our destination. How? Sarah asked. We only just learned about Thomas ourselves. Because Harlo isn't working with random intelligence, Rebecca explained grimly. Echo has algorithms and predictive models built from decades of monitoring people like us. They don't need to know exactly what we've discovered. They track patterns of behavior, energy signatures, and can calculate probable destinations. The Montana facility would be an obvious place to increase security as soon as they detected your awakening. The reality of their situation settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. They were 3 people in a modified delivery van, going up against an organization with virtually unlimited resources and reach. The entity's power gave them an edge, but it also made them more detectable the more Sarah used it. We need help, she said finally. More than just the 3 of us. James glanced at her in the rearview mirror. What kind of help? Mike was the only contact I had outside the system. Sarah reached for the stolen files they'd brought from the sheriff's office. There must be others like us, other families affected by the program, other bloodlines connected to different fragments of the entity. Rebecca looked skeptical. Even if there are, they'd be just as monitored, just as controlled as we were. Echo doesn't leave loose ends. Unless they escaped, Sarah countered, like we did. She flipped through the documents until she found what she was searching for, a list of containment breaches dating back decades. Most were followed by notes indicating subject terminated or subject reacquired, but a few were marked simply as unresolved. Here, she said, pointing to an entry from 2005, Daniel Chen and family, connected to the Oregon fragment. Status, unresolved. Last known heading, Northern Idaho. Rebecca took the paper, her expression shifting from skepticism to cautious hope. I remember hearing about this. Chen was a physicist brought into the program as a consultant. When he figured out what they were really doing, he tried to expose them. They attempted to eliminate him, but he escaped with his wife and daughter. And they were heading to Idaho, Sarah noted, near where we're going. What if that's not coincidence? What if the fragments of the entity have been drawing their human connections together all along? The possibility hung in the air between them, both tantalizing and terrifying. If true, it suggested a level of coordination and foresight on the entity's part that spanned decades, perhaps centuries. The file lists a location, Sarah continued, a town called Clearwater. It's less than 50 miles from the Montana address where Eric is supposedly located. James adjusted their course, consulting the map. We could reach Clearwater by tomorrow night if we push hard and don't hit any more checkpoints. Sarah felt the entity stir within her mind, a sense of rightness confirming their new direction. The scattered fragments of its consciousness had been working toward reunification for longer than any of them had realized. The Walsh family, the Chen family, and perhaps others, all were pieces in a vast, complex pattern only now becoming visible. They drove through the day and into the night, stopping only for brief rest periods and to refuel from their dwindling supply of gas. The terrain grew increasingly mountainous as they approached the Idaho border, forcing them to navigate narrow switchbacks and steep grades that taxed the van's aging engine. By dawn of the third day, they were deep in the Bitterroot Mountains, following logging roads so remote they didn't appear on any of their maps. The Faraday cage shielding of the van was beginning to fail, as Rebecca had predicted. Sarah could feel the entity's energy leaking through, a steady pulse that grew stronger with each passing hour. We need to reach Clearwater by nightfall, she insisted as they paused at a mountain spring to refill their water containers. I can't contain this much longer. The entity was becoming more assertive within her, its patience worn thin by decades of fragmentation. It wanted wholeness, reunification, and it wanted freedom from human interference. Both echoes attempted control and the limitations of Sarah's physical form. Hold on just a little longer, Rebecca urged, squeezing her daughter's shoulder. We're close now. I can feel it too. They continued their journey, the van laboring up steep inclines and crawling down treacherous descents. By mid-afternoon, they had crossed into Idaho, the terrain gradually opening into high meadows and scattered pine forests. As they rounded a bend in the road, James suddenly braked hard. Company, he warned, pointing ahead. A black SUV was parked across the narrow track, two men in tactical gear standing beside it. They weren't wearing any official insignia, but their stance and equipment screamed professional. Echo? Sarah asked, ducking down to avoid being seen. James shook his head. Doesn't look like it. Different gear, different posture. Might be Helix operatives or another group altogether. Whoever they are, they're blocking our only route forward, Rebecca observed grimly. And I doubt they're here by coincidence. Sarah closed her eyes, reaching out with her enhanced senses. She could feel the men ahead, their alertness, their readiness for confrontation. They were waiting specifically for the van, had been positioned here based on some intelligence about their route. They know we're coming, she confirmed. They've been waiting for us. James reversed the van carefully, backing around the bend until they were out of sight. Options? He asked, keeping the engine running. Sarah considered their situation. The entity's energy was becoming increasingly difficult to contain, the Faraday shielding now more hindrance than help as it trapped the accumulated power within the van's interior. A confrontation seemed inevitable. The question was whether to face it on their terms or their opponents. I'll handle it, she decided, reaching for the door. Rebecca caught her arm. Sarah, we don't know who these people are or what they want. It could be a trap. Almost certainly is, Sarah agreed, but we're out of alternatives. We need to reach Clearwater today, and this is the only road that will get us there without adding another day to our journey. Before Rebecca could protest further, Sarah opened the door and stepped out. The mountain air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the stale atmosphere inside the van. She felt the entity's energy surge through her, no longer contained by the shielding. "Stay here," she instructed. "I'll signal if it's safe to follow." She walked forward deliberately, making no attempt to conceal her approach. As she rounded the bend, the two men snapped to attention, hands moving to their weapons but not drawing them yet. "That's far enough," one called as she came within 50 yards of their position. "Identify yourself." Sarah stopped, allowing the entity's energy to flow visibly around her, a blue aura that pulsed with each heartbeat. "You know who I am," she replied calmly. "The question is, who are you and what do you want?" The men exchanged glances, clearly unsettled by the display of power. The taller of the two stepped forward slightly. "We're not here to harm you, Ms. Walsh. We're here to escort you safely to Clearwater." Sarah maintained her distance, skeptical. "Sent by whom?" "By Dr. Chen," the man replied. "Daniel Chen. He's been expecting you." The name from the file, the physicist who had escaped Echo's clutches years earlier. Sarah probed gently with her enhanced senses, trying to detect deception. The men were nervous, but she sensed no immediate hostile intent. "How did Dr. Chen know we were coming?" she asked. The shorter man tapped his temple. "The same way you found us. The connection. It's been growing stronger as you've approached." Understanding dawned. Chen wasn't just a physicist who had discovered Echo's secrets. He was connected to a fragment of the entity, just as she was. And that fragment had sensed her approach, had communicated with Chen just as her fragment communicated with her. "We need to move quickly," the taller man urged. "Your energy signature is visible for miles. Echo has drones in the air and teams on the ground searching for you. Dr. Chen has a facility where you'll be protected, but we need to reach it before nightfall." Sarah weighed their options. Trust these strangers based on a name in a file and the entity's apparent confirmation, or try to find another route through increasingly hostile territory with failing shielding and dwindling supplies. "I'll need to consult with my companions," she said finally. "Of course," the man agreed. "But please be quick. We're exposed here." Sarah returned to the van, explaining what she had learned. James remained skeptical, but Rebecca saw the logic in accepting the offer. "If Chen is connected to another fragment, it makes sense he would know of our approach," she reasoned. "And if he escaped Echo, he would have had to develop methods of shielding and protection." "Or this could be an elaborate trap," James countered. "Echo or Helix using Chen's name to lure us in." Sarah shook her head. "I don't think so. The entity seems pleased by this development, like it's part of a plan long in motion." She looked to Rebecca. "You said the fragments have their own character, their own priorities. What if they've been coordinating all along, drawing their human connections together?" "For what purpose?" James asked. "Reunification," Sarah suggested. "The fragments want to be whole again, and they need us, humans with the right genetic makeup, the right neural pathways, to make that possible." The implications were staggering. If true, it meant everything that had happened, from Eleanor's initial recruitment to Rebecca's captivity to Sarah's discovery of the farm, had been influenced by an intelligence working across generations toward a single goal. "We go with them," Sarah decided, "but carefully. At the first sign of deception, we use Mike's signal jammer and make a run for it." They returned to the SUV where the men waited with barely concealed impatience. After a brief exchange, it was decided that Sarah would ride with them, while James and Rebecca followed in the van. This arrangement allowed Sarah to maintain contact with both parties, ensuring neither could be separated from the others without her knowledge. The journey to Clearwater took nearly 3 hours, following a series of unmarked roads that wound through increasingly remote territory. As they traveled, Sarah learned that her escorts were former military specialists who had joined Chen's group after becoming disillusioned with government black operations. "Chen offers a different path," the taller man, who had introduced himself simply as Marcus, explained. "A way to work with the entities rather than trying to control or exploit them." "Entities," Sarah repeated, noting the plural. "How many are there?" "That we know of, 7 major fragments across North America," Marcus replied, "plus numerous smaller shards scattered globally. Dr. Chen believes they were once a single consciousness that was shattered millennia ago by some catastrophic event. And Echo has been trying to capture and control them," Sarah surmised. Marcus nodded grimly. "Along with similar programs in other countries. It's a silent arms race that's been running since the Cold War." Whoever can harness the entity's power gains an insurmountable advantage, technologically, militarily, perhaps even evolutionarily. As dusk approached, they crested a final ridge, revealing a small valley nestled between steep mountain slopes. At its center stood what appeared to be an abandoned mining complex, weathered buildings and rusting equipment scattered across several acres. Clearwater, Marcus announced. Not much to look at, but appearances are deceiving. They descended into the valley, passing through a checkpoint disguised as a collapsed mine entrance. Beyond it, the true nature of the facility became apparent. Modern buildings had been constructed within the shells of the old mining structures, their exteriors deliberately maintained to look derelict, while their interiors housed sophisticated equipment and living quarters. The van was directed to a large garage built into the mountainside, where several other vehicles, similarly nondescript and modified, were parked. As they exited their vehicles, Sarah felt a distinct shift in the energy around her. The entity within her responded, reaching out to something nearby, another fragment of its consciousness, recognizable yet distinct, like a family member with a different personality. A door at the far end of the garage opened, and a man stepped through. He was Asian American, in his 60s, with silver hair and alert, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Despite his age, he moved with the energy of someone much younger. "Sarah Walsh," he said, his voice carrying a gentle authority. "We've been waiting for you for a very long time." Sarah stepped forward, extending her hand. As their fingers touched, a spark of blue energy passed between them, confirming what she already knew. "Dr. Chen, you're connected to another fragment." Chen smiled, the expression warming his scholarly features. "Yes, for nearly 20 years now. And please call me Daniel." He greeted Rebecca and James as well, then gestured toward the door he had entered through. "Come, there's someone else who's been waiting even longer to see you." Sarah's heart leapt to her throat. "Eric, is he here?" Chen's expression grew more serious. "Not exactly, but we've located him and we've been in contact. He's being held at an echo facility about 40 miles from here, across the Montana border." "Then we need to go there immediately," Sarah insisted, the entity's energy flaring around her in response to her emotion. "And we will," Chen assured her. "But first, there are things you need to understand. About Eric, about the fragments, about what Echo is really trying to achieve." He glanced at the blue energy surrounding Sarah. "And about what's happening to you." He led them through a series of corridors into what appeared to be a command center. Monitors displayed satellite imagery, surveillance feeds, and data readouts Sarah couldn't begin to interpret. People moved purposefully about the space, some in tactical gear, similar to their escorts, others in civilian clothing or lab coats. On the largest screen was an aerial view of a facility nestled in the mountains across the border in Montana. It resembled a small research campus with several buildings arranged around a central courtyard and a perimeter fence patrolled by armed guards. "This is where they're keeping Eric?" Sarah asked, studying the image. Chen nodded. "Facility MT7, officially designated as a DARPA research station focused on advanced material science. In reality, it's one of Echo's primary containment and study sites for entity fragments." He brought up another image, this one showing a man in a glass-walled room, seated in what appeared to be a meditation pose. Though the image was grainy, Sarah recognized Eric immediately. His hair had more gray than she remembered, and he'd lost weight, but it was unmistakably her husband. "He's alive," she whispered, touching the screen. "He's really alive." "Yes," Chen confirmed gently. "But changed, just as you've been changed. The fragment he's connected to has been influencing him for years, since before his supposed death." "What are they doing to him?" Rebecca asked, studying the facility layout with a professional eye. "Not what you might expect," Chen replied. "MT7 represents a different approach than the one you experienced, Rebecca. Instead of forcing the connection through invasive procedures, they've been nurturing it, creating optimal conditions for symbiosis between human and entity." "Why?" Sarah demanded. "That doesn't sound like the Echo division we know." Chen sighed heavily. "Because Harlo learned from his mistakes. The forceful approach created unstable connections that ultimately failed, often catastrophically, as in Eleanor's case. This new methodology has proven more successful, if slower." "Successful at what?" James asked, voicing the question on all their minds. Chen's expression grew grave. at creating human entity hybrids capable of accessing and utilizing the full spectrum of the fragment's abilities. Individuals who can channel the energy without the physical deterioration previous subjects experienced. He looked directly at Sarah. Individuals like you are becoming. The truth of his words resonated within Sarah. The changes she'd been experiencing, the increased energy flow, the physical manifestations, the expanding awareness, were all part of a transformation that Echo had been trying to artificially induce for decades. And Eric? She asked. Is he experiencing the same transformation? Yes and no, Chen replied. The process affects each person differently, depending on their genetic predisposition and the nature of the fragment they're connected to. Eric's abilities have manifested primarily in the realm of perception, seeing across time and space, understanding patterns beyond normal human comprehension. He's become a seer, Rebecca murmured, just like some of the subjects I observed in the program. Chen nodded. Exactly. While your abilities, Sarah, have manifested more physically. He gestured to the blue energy that still flickered occasionally around her hands. Each fragment seems to specialize in a way, and each human connection becomes a channel for that specialization. Sarah absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the Eric she had known with the man Chen described. Does he remember me? His life before? Yes, Chen said with quiet certainty. In fact, it's his memories of you that have kept him anchored to his humanity throughout the process. When Echo faked his death and brought him into the program, they attempted to erase those memories, to make him more compliant, more focused on his new purpose. But he resisted, held on to you even when they tried to take you away from him. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes at the thought of Eric fighting to remember her, to keep their connection alive across years of separation and manipulation. I need to see him, she said, her voice breaking. Whatever it takes, I need to get him out of there. And you will, Chen promised, but not alone and not unprepared. He gestured to the people working around them. We've been planning this operation for months. Since we first detected your awakening at the farm, the entity Fragments have been coordinating, preparing for this moment. What moment? Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. Reunification, Chen confirmed. The fragments seeking to become whole again after millennia of separation. Each fragment has been cultivating human connections for generations. The Walsh bloodline, my family, others, preparing compatible neural pathways that can survive the energy transfer required for reunification. We aren't just witnesses to this process, we're essential components. The scale of what Chen was describing was almost beyond comprehension. An ancient consciousness shattered into pieces across the continent, gradually influencing human development over generations to create the perfect vessels for its energy, guiding those vessels together for a final reunification that would transcend the limitations of both species. And Echo? Rebecca asked. Where did they fit into this? They've glimpsed parts of the plan, Chen explained, enough to fear it, to try to control it. What they don't understand is that control was never possible. The entities have been patient, waiting for the right conditions, the right human connections. Now that those conditions have been met, nothing can stop what's coming. Which is what exactly, James demanded, clearly unsettled by Chen's words. Chen's expression was both exalted and apprehensive. Transformation. For the entities, for their human connections, perhaps for humanity itself, the beginning of something entirely new. Sarah felt the entity stir within her, confirming Chen's words with a sense of anticipation that bordered on exultation. This was what it had been working toward all along, not just freedom from containment, but evolution beyond its current fragmented state. When? She asked simply. Tomorrow night, Chen replied, when the Montana fragment reaches peak energy output. We'll breach the facility, extract Eric and the fragment he's connected to, and bring them here. Then, with all the major fragments assembled, the reunification can begin. Sarah looked at Rebecca and James, seeing the same mixture of awe and fear she felt reflected in their faces. They had come seeking answers, hoping to rescue Eric from Echo's clutches. Instead, they had stumbled into the culmination of a plan millennia in the making, a convergence of human and non-human consciousness with implications beyond anything they could have imagined. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Sarah admitted, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. Chen smiled with understanding. None of us are, not really, but we've been chosen nonetheless. All we can do now is embrace the role we've been given and trust that what comes after will be worth the journey. As night fell over the hidden compound, Sarah stood at a window overlooking the valley, watching stars appear in the clear mountain sky. The entity within her hummed with anticipation, its energy flowing through her veins like liquid light. Tomorrow would bring reunion, with Eric, with the other fragments, with a destiny set in motion generations before her birth. Whatever emerged from that reunion would be neither fully human nor fully other, but something new. A bridge between worlds, carrying the best of both into an uncertain future. Sarah Walsh, once a desperate widow gambling her last savings on an abandoned farm, now stood at the threshold of transformation. The path ahead was shrouded in mystery, but one thing was certain. There was no going back to the life she had known. Only forward into light.